Chapter 1: The Dawn of Eternity. What transformed the Nile Valley into the cradle of immortality? The sun rises over the Nile Delta, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, the same colors that ancient Egyptians believed represented the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. For over 3,000 years, along the banks of this life-giving river, humanity constructed perhaps its most elaborate answer to the fundamental question that haunts every conscious being: what happens when we die? But the story of Egyptian religion isn't merely about death. It's about life so vibrant, so intricately woven with meaning, that death became not an ending, but a transformation, a doorway to something even greater. To understand this civilization's obsession with the afterlife, we must first understand how geography, climate, and the very rhythm of the Nile shaped a worldview unlike any other in human history: the archaeological evidence of belief. In 1922, when Howard Carter peered through a small hole into the tomb of Tutankhamun and famously reported seeing wonderful things, he was witnessing more than gold and treasures. He was looking at the physical manifestation of a belief system so powerful that it had compelled an entire civilization to pour its resources, artistry, and devotion into preparing for what came after death. The tomb contained 5,398 objects, each carefully chosen to serve the young pharaoh in his journey through the afterlife. The evidence of Egyptian religious belief isn't limited to royal tombs. Archaeological excavations at sites like Saqqara, Giza, and the Valley of the Kings have revealed that this preoccupation with the afterlife extended throughout society. Even the poorest Egyptians were buried with at least a few amulets, some food offerings, and perhaps a simple Shabti figure, a small statue believed to serve as a magical servant in the afterlife. Dr. Salima Ikram, professor of Egyptology at the American University in Cairo, has spent decades studying animal mummies and burial practices. Her research reveals that Egyptians mummified millions of animals from cats and dogs to ibises and crocodiles not as pets, but as votive offerings to the gods and as companions for the journey to the afterlife. This wasn't superstition, it was systematic theology made tangible. The Nile, river of life, river of rebirth. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and this observation cuts to the heart of Egyptian religious thought. The Nile's annual flood cycle created a natural metaphor for death and resurrection that permeated every aspect of Egyptian spirituality. Each year, between June and September, the Nile would flood, turning the valley into a vast lake. When the waters receded, they left behind rich, black silt kemet in ancient Egyptian, which also became the name they used for their land. This black, fertile soil contrasted sharply with the red, lifeless desert deshret that surrounded the narrow green strip of the river valley. This dramatic annual transformation wasn't random. Modern hydrological studies have shown that the Nile flood was remarkably predictable, varying in timing by only a few days each year. This predictability allowed Egyptians to develop one of the earliest accurate calendars. But more importantly, it created a cosmic pattern they could trust. Life emerged from apparent death with clockwork regularity. If the land could be reborn each year, why not human beings? The papyrus documents from ancient Egypt explicitly make this connection. The pyramid texts, carved into the walls of pyramids during the Old Kingdom c. 2686 to 2181 BCE, contain spells that compare the deceased king to the land itself. You shall live again forever. Here you are, young once more forever. The pharaoh's resurrection was tied to the land's resurrection, creating a sacred bond between ruler, river, and cosmic order. The birth of the gods. Egyptian gods didn't emerge from a single creation myth written in stone. Instead, the evidence shows that Egyptian religion evolved over millennia, incorporating local deities from different regions as political power shifted. When we examine the archaeological record, we find that some gods, like Ptah of Memphis, can be traced back to at least 3,100 BCE, while others gain prominence much later. The Hermopolitan creation myth, recorded in texts from the Middle Kingdom but likely much older, tells of a primordial ocean called Nun Chaos itself, dark and formless. From this chaos emerged the first land, a mound rising from the waters. This myth directly reflected what Egyptians witnessed every year when the Nile floods receded, revealing islands of land that seemed to emerge from nowhere. But here's where Egyptian thinking becomes sophisticated. They didn't choose one creation story and declare it the sole truth. Multiple creation myths coexisted, each centered on different cult centers. Heliopolis with its sun god Ra-Atum, Memphis with the creator Ptah, Hermopolis with its 8 primordial deities called the Ogdoad, and Thebes with Amun, the hidden one. Dr. Eric Hornung, one of the 20th century's leading Egyptologists, argued that this apparent contradiction was actually a feature, not a bug, of Egyptian religious thought. The Egyptians, he proposed, practiced aspectival thinking. They understood that truth could be approached from multiple perspectives, all valid simultaneously. The sun god could be Khepri, the scarab, at dawn, Ra, at noon, and Atum, at dusk, yet these were all aspects of one solar divinity. Physical evidence supports this theological flexibility. At the Temple of Karnak in Luxor, inscriptions from different periods show how the god Amun absorbed characteristics of other deities. During the New Kingdom c. 1550 to 1077 BCE, he became Amun-Ra, combining the hidden creative force of Amun with the visible life-giving power of the sun god Ra. This wasn't confusion. It was a sophisticated theological synthesis. The Ennead, the great company of gods. The most influential creation myth centered on Heliopolis, the city of the sun, located near modern Cairo. Here, priests developed a creation story involving 9 principal deities, the Ennead. Archaeological evidence from the pyramid text shows this system was well established by 2400 BCE, though it's certainly older. In the beginning, according to this theology, was Atum, the complete one, who existed alone in the dark waters of none. Through an act of will, or in more explicit versions, through masturbation or spitting, Adam created the first divine couple, Shu, god of air and dry air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture and corrosive air. The sexual explicitness of some versions shouldn't shock us. Egyptian religion was remarkably frank about bodily functions, seeing them as part of the sacred cycle of creation. Shu and Tefnut gave birth to Geb, the earth god depicted as male, lying on the ground, and Nut, the sky goddess female, arching over the earth. This reversal of many other cultures' gender assignments for earth and sky tells us something important. Egyptians weren't simply borrowing their theology from neighbors. They were developing unique conceptions based on their own observations and reasoning. The children of Geb and Nut form 2 of the most important divine relationships in Egyptian mythology, Osiris and Isis, Set and Nephthys. The story of these 4 gods would become the central drama of Egyptian religion, a tale of murder, resurrection, and the establishment of cosmic order. The Osiris cycle, death of a god. The myth of Osiris is more than a story. It's the theological foundation for Egyptian beliefs about death, resurrection, and the afterlife. While no single complete version survives from ancient Egypt, scholars have pieced together the narrative from numerous sources: the pyramid texts, coffin texts, the Book of the Dead, and much later, a detailed account by the Greek writer Plutarch in his work De Iside et Osiride on Isis and Osiris from the 1st century CE. Osiris, the story goes, was the first king of Egypt, ruling during a golden age when he taught humans agriculture, law, and religion. His brother Set, god of chaos, storms, and the desert, grew jealous of Osiris's power and popularity. The motives vary in different versions. Some emphasize Set's jealousy. Others suggest deeper cosmic conflicts between order and chaos, the fertile Nile Valley and the barren desert. Set crafted an elaborate trap. He built a beautiful coffin, precisely sized to Osiris's measurements, and announced at a feast that he would give this magnificent chest to whoever fit inside it perfectly. When Osiris climbed in, Set and his conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealed it, and threw the coffin into the Nile. The coffin floated to Byblos in Phoenicia, modern Lebanon, where it became encased in a tamarisk tree. This detail about Byblos isn't random mythology. Archaeological evidence confirms extensive trade between Egypt and Byblos, particularly in cedar wood, which Egypt lacked. The myth incorporates real geographical knowledge, grounding fantastic events in familiar places. Isis, Both wife and sister of Osiris, Egyptian royal siblings commonly married to keep the bloodline pure, embarked on a desperate search. Her grief was so profound that her tears were said to cause the Nile's annual flood. When she finally located Osiris's body in Byblos, she returned it to Egypt. But Set discovered the body and, in fury, dismembered Osiris into 14 pieces, or 42, in some versions matching the number of nomes or provinces in Egypt, scattering them throughout the land. Isis, aided by her sister Nephthys, searched throughout Egypt, recovering the pieces. According to most versions, she found all except the phallus, which had been eaten by a fish. Using her magical powers, Isis reassembled Osiris and, through the first mummification, preserved his body. Some versions, recorded in the pyramid text, describe how Isis fashioned a golden phallus and, transforming herself into a kite, a bird of prey, hovered over Osiris's restored body and conceived a son, Horus, the historical reality behind the myth. Modern Egyptologists debate whether any historical reality underlies the Osiris myth. Some scholars, like Dr. David O'Connor of New York University, suggest the story might preserve distant memories of prehistoric conflicts between Upper and Lower Egypt, with Set representing Lower Egypt and Osiris representing Upper Egypt. The unification of Egypt under the first pharaohs around 3100 BCE might echo through this divine conflict. Physical evidence from early Egyptian history shows that the concept of Osiris as a vegetation god dying and being reborn like the crops was central from very early times. Agricultural societies worldwide developed similar myths, but the Egyptians elaborated theirs to an extraordinary degree. The identification of dead pharaohs with Osiris appears in the pyramid texts and continues throughout Egyptian history. Every deceased king became Osiris, while the living king was Horus. This wasn't metaphorical. In Egyptian thought, the king literally became the god. This theological concept had profound political implications, legitimizing the pharaoh's absolute authority. But the democratization of this belief is what makes Egyptian religion unique. By the Middle Kingdom c. 2055 to 1650 BCE, not just pharaohs but common people could identify with Osiris in death. The coffin texts, inscribed on middle-class coffins, contained spells that previously only protected royalty. As Dr. Jan Assmann, the German Egyptologist, has argued, this represents one of history's first democratizations of religious salvation, the idea that eternal life was available to all, not just the elite. The throne of judgment. Osiris's resurrection didn't return him to the world of the living. Instead, he became lord of the underworld, the Duat ruling over the dead from his throne in the Hall of Two Truths. This transformation from murdered god to divine judge established a critical principle in Egyptian theology. Death wasn't oblivion, but transformation into a different state of being. Artistic evidence from tomb paintings and papyri depicts Osiris seated on his throne, his skin colored green representing resurrection and vegetation, or black representing the fertile Nile silt and the rich earth of the grave. He holds the crook and flail symbols of kingship and agricultural abundance crossed over his chest. He wears the Atef crown, a white crown flanked by ostrich feathers, and his body is wrapped in mummy bandages, visible proof of his death and resurrection. The iconography is consistent across centuries, whether in the tomb of Nefertari, 13th century BCE, the papyrus of Ani C, 1250 BCE, or later, Ptolemaic period temples, Osiris appears in this same form. This consistency suggests a firmly established theology that changed little over millennia, remarkable stability in religious thought. Behind Osiris in these scenes often stand Isis and Nephthys, his divine protectors. Before him appears Anubis, the jackal-headed god who guides the dead, and Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, who records the verdict of judgment. These aren't arbitrary choices of figures. Each god has a specific role in the cosmic drama of death and rebirth, the promise of resurrection. What made the Osiris myth so powerful wasn't just the story itself, but the promise it contained. If a god could die and be resurrected, so could humans. This wasn't blind faith, but reasoned theology. The logic went, Osiris was murdered, dismembered, reassembled, mummified, and restored to life in the afterlife. By undergoing the same process, ritual mummification and proper burial, with the right spells and amulets, any Egyptian could follow the same path. The evidence of this belief pervades Egyptian culture. The practice of mummification, which modern science has studied extensively, was an expensive, elaborate process, taking 70 days, yet it persisted for over 3,000 years, from the Old Kingdom through the Roman period, because Egyptians believed it was essential for resurrection. Dr. Bob Breyer, a pioneering researcher who conducted the first scientific mummification using ancient techniques in 1994, discovered that the process required sophisticated chemical knowledge. The ancient Egyptians used natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, to desiccate bodies, removing moisture that would otherwise cause decay. They understood that preservation of the physical body was necessary for the Ka life, force, and Ba, personality, soul, to reunite in the afterlife. Chemical analysis of mummies by Dr. Stephen Buckley of the University of York has revealed that embalmers use complex recipes including conifer resin, plant oils, beeswax, and sometimes even imported materials from as far as Southeast Asia. This wasn't simple preservation, it was sacred chemistry, transforming a corpse into a vessel for eternal life. The theology was clear. You were not just your spirit, you were also your body. Both needed to be preserved and reunited. This fundamentally embodied view of existence contrasts sharply with religious traditions that view the body as a prison from which the soul must escape. For Egyptians, the body was essential, sacred, and worthy of preservation. The spread and evolution of Osiris worship. The cult of Osiris wasn't static. Archaeological evidence traces its evolution and spread across Egypt. The city of Abydos in Upper Egypt became the primary cult center, believed to be the burial place of Osiris himself. Excavations there have revealed that Egyptians from all over the country made pilgrimages to Abydos, either during life or symbolically after death. During the Middle Kingdom, it became fashionable for Egyptians to erect cenotaphs, memorial monuments, at Abydos, or to have their mummies transported there, at least temporarily, so they could participate in the sacred landscape where Osiris was said to rest. Thousands of these monuments have been found, ranging from simple offering stones to elaborate chapels. By the late period c. 664 to 332 BCE, Osiris had become arguably the most popular god in Egypt. The festival of Osiris at Abydos was a massive public spectacle, with passion plays reenacting his death and resurrection. A Middle Kingdom official named Ikernofret left an inscription describing his role in organizing these festivals during the reign of Senusret III, c. 1878 to 1839 BCE. His account provides rare insight into public religious practice, showing how myth was transformed into ritual drama that the entire community could witness and participate in. The appeal of Osiris crossed cultural boundaries. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE and the Ptolemaic dynasty began, Greek rulers embraced Osiris, combining him with their own god of the underworld to create Serapis. This syncretic deity had temples throughout the Mediterranean world, spreading Egyptian concepts of death and resurrection across the Greco-Roman world. Some scholars, like Dr. Egyptologist Robert Rittner, have argued that the Osiris myth influenced later resurrection narratives in Christianity, though direct connections remain debated and controversial. What's undeniable is that the concept of a god who dies and is resurrected, offering eternal life to followers, originated in Egypt millennia before similar themes appeared elsewhere. The other great gods. While Osiris dominated theology about the afterlife, the Egyptian pantheon included hundreds of deities, each with specific domains and powers. Understanding these gods is essential to grasping how Egyptians perceived the cosmos. Ra, the sun god, predated Osiris in worship and remained supremely important throughout Egyptian history. Every day, Ra traveled across the sky in his solar bark, boat, battling the forces of chaos. At night, he journeyed through the underworld, bringing light to the dead. This daily cycle was more than mythology. It was observable reality given divine meaning. The evidence for solar theology is everywhere in Egyptian architecture. The pyramids themselves, according to many Egyptologists, represent the rays of the sun shining down to earth, providing a stairway for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the sky. The pyramid texts explicitly state, "I have laid down for myself those rays of yours as a stairway under my feet." The temples were oriented to capture sunlight at specific times. At Abu Simbel, the massive temple built by Ramesses II, the inner sanctuary is designed so that twice a year, on what many believe to be Ramesses' birthday and coronation day, the rising sun penetrates the entire length of the temple and illuminates the statues of the gods in the innermost shrine. This wasn't accident, but astronomical precision combined with religious symbolism. Isis, beyond her role in the Osiris myth, became one of Egypt's most enduring deities. She represented magical power, motherhood, and protection. Artistic representations show her nursing her son Horus, an image that some art historians suggest influenced later Christian iconography of Mary and Jesus. The cult of Isis spread throughout the Roman Empire, rivaling Christianity in popularity during the 1st century CE. Temples to Isis have been found as far as London and Afghanistan. The appeal was partly her promise of personal salvation and partly her role as the ultimate divine mother, caring, protective, and accessible to worshippers. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, served as the inventor of hieroglyphs and the keeper of divine knowledge. In the Judgment of the Dead, Thoth recorded the results, making him essential to the afterlife journey. The Greeks later identified him with Hermes, and a whole tradition of Hermetic mysticism grew up around his supposed teachings. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, presided over mummification and guided souls to judgment. His animal form wasn't arbitrary. Jackals and wild dogs were commonly seen in cemeteries, scavenging graves. By making a god in this image, Egyptians transformed a threat into a protector. The jackal, who once might desecrate a grave, now guards it for eternity. The cosmic order, Dot. Perhaps the most important concept in Egyptian religion wasn't a god, but a principle, Ma'at, often personified as a goddess wearing an ostrich feather. Ma'at represented truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. She was the daughter of Ra and the fundamental principle that kept the universe from collapsing back into chaos. Ma'at was both descriptive and prescriptive. She described how the universe operated and prescribed how humans should behave. The pharaoh's primary responsibility was to maintain Ma'at, ensuring the Nile flooded, the sun rose, and society remained orderly. Every Egyptian was expected to live in accordance with Ma'at, and after death, their adherence to her principles would be judged. This wasn't merely abstract philosophy. Legal texts, wisdom literature, and biographical inscriptions constantly reference Ma'at. Officials boasted in their tomb inscriptions that they spoke Ma'at and did Ma'at. These weren't empty claims, but assertions that their lives embodied cosmic principles. The Negative Confession, a text in the Book of the Dead, lists 42 declarations the deceased must make before the gods. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not told lies, I have not been angry without cause. Each declaration aligned with Ma'at, and the judgment of the dead centered on whether the deceased had lived according to her principles. The emphasis on Ma'at reveals something profound about Egyptian ethics. Morality wasn't based solely on divine command or fear of punishment. It was cosmic necessity. To violate Ma'at was to align yourself with Isfet chaos, disorder, destruction, the fundamental enemy of all existence. Dr. Emily Teeter of the Oriental Institute has argued that this concept made Egyptian religion fundamentally optimistic. The universe was ordered, meaningful, and operated according to comprehensible principles. Humans weren't helpless before arbitrary divine whims. They could understand what the gods required and achieve it through ethical living and proper ritual. The end of the beginning. As the sun sets over the Nile, the same scene that played out countless times in ancient Egypt, we begin to understand why this civilization poured such energy into religion. It wasn't fear that motivated them, but hope grounded in the observable cycles of nature, elaborated through sophisticated theology, and made accessible through ritual and ethical living. The gods weren't distant abstractions, but intimate presences, explaining every aspect of existence from the flooding of the Nile to the destiny of the human soul. The afterlife wasn't a vague promise, but a detailed geography that could be mapped, prepared for, and achieved through proper knowledge and conduct. We've answered our opening question. What transformed the Nile Valley into the cradle of immortality? It was the combination of predictable natural cycles that demonstrated rebirth was possible, a priestly class that developed these observations into complex theology, and a culture-wide commitment to the idea that death was not an end, but a transformation. But this is only the beginning of our journey. We've met the gods and understood their origins, but we haven't yet walked the path that every Egyptian expected to walk after death. We haven't faced the trials of the underworld, the judgment that would determine eternal fate, or the paradise that awaited the justified. That journey begins in the next chapter, where we'll follow the soul through death and into the mysterious realm of the Duat, guided by the funerary texts that promise to illuminate the darkness beyond the grave. Trial, one, bon, and, doin, and. Chapter 2, the journey begins. What happened at the moment of death, and how did Egyptians prepare for it? The exact moment when life departs the body has haunted human consciousness since our ancestors first recognized their own mortality. For ancient Egyptians, this wasn't a simple transition from existence to non-existence, but the beginning of the most important journey anyone would ever undertake, a journey that required preparation, knowledge, and the right equipment. When we examine the archaeological evidence, tomb paintings, funerary texts, and the physical remains of mummification, we discover that Egyptians developed perhaps humanity's most detailed roadmap for the transition from life to afterlife. This wasn't wishful thinking, but systematic planning, as carefully organized as an expedition into unknown territory, which, in a sense, it was. The multiple souls. To understand Egyptian beliefs about death, we must first grasp their concept of the self. Modern Western thought typically divides humans into body and soul, but Egyptians recognize at least 5 distinct components to a human being, each with different requirements and destinies. The physical body was the most obvious component, but Egyptians didn't view it as a mere vessel to be discarded. As we've discussed, preservation of the body through mummification was essential because other aspects of the self needed it as an anchor point. The Ka was the life force, often translated as double or vital essence. Artistic depictions show the Ka as a duplicate of the person, sometimes represented by 2 upraised arms. The Ka was created at birth and survived death, but it required sustenance, hence the elaborate food offerings left in tombs. The Ka couldn't eat physical food, but it could absorb the spiritual essence of offerings, the scent and appearance being enough to nourish it. Archaeological excavations have found thousands of offering tables with channels carved to pour libations and depressions to hold food. These weren't decorative, they were functional objects for feeding the Ka. Some tombs included elaborate painted menus on the walls, ensuring that even if physical offerings ceased, magical representations would continue to sustain the Ka forever. The Ba is perhaps the most complex concept, often simplified as soul or personality. Depicted as a human-headed bird, the Ba represented individuality, character, and mobility. Unlike the Ka, which remained in or near the tomb, the Ba could travel between the tomb and the afterlife, and even revisit places the deceased had known in life. Numerous funerary texts express concern about the Ba. Spells in the Book of the Dead aim to ensure the Ba can move freely, recognize its own body, and reunite with it. This reunion of Ba and Ka in the preserved body created the Akh, the transfigured, affective spirit that could dwell among the gods. The shadow and the name Ren completed the 5 essential components. The shadow had its own semi-independent existence, while the name was considered so essential that to erase someone's name from monuments was to destroy them in the afterlife, a fate reserved for the worst criminals and hated rulers. This is why we see pharaohs like Hatshepsut and Akhenaten having their names deliberately chiseled out by successors seeking to erase their existence. This sophisticated psychology of self explains many Egyptian practices that might otherwise seem strange. Mummification preserved the body for the Ka and Ba. Tomb paintings and statues provided backup bodies if the mummy was destroyed. The name was inscribed repeatedly, ensuring its survival. Food offerings sustained the Ka. Funerary texts gave the Ba knowledge to navigate the afterlife, the process of dying. What actually happened when an Egyptian died? Medical evidence from mummies, combined with ancient medical texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus and the Ebers Papyrus, gives us insight into how Egyptians understood death. The moment of death was recognized by cessation of breathing and heartbeat. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to around 1550 BCE, contains descriptions of examining a patient's pulse and breathing to determine if life remained. Egyptian physicians, who were often also priests, understood that death was a process rather than an instant event. Contemporary medical studies of mummies have revealed the diseases and injuries that killed ancient Egyptians. Dr. Sahar Salim and colleagues at Cairo University, using CT scans of royal mummies, have identified causes of death ranging from malaria and tuberculosis to battlefield injuries and possible assassination. Ramesses III, for instance, had his throat cut, likely during the Harem conspiracy, recorded in historical documents. When death was recognized, specific rituals began immediately. The family would begin mourning demonstrations, wailing, throwing dust on their heads, and for women, baring their breasts. These weren't mere emotional outbursts, but prescribed ritual behaviors. Tomb paintings frequently depict these mourning scenes, showing them as expected and necessary parts of the death process. The body was then taken to the Nefer, the perfect house, where embalmers worked. This wasn't done immediately, but there wasn't much delay either. In Egypt's hot climate, decomposition would begin quickly. The entire mummification process took 70 days, a period that had both practical and symbolic significance, possibly connected to the 70 days that the star Sirius disappeared from the sky before its heliacal rising, which marked the new year and the Nile flood. The sacred art of mummification. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, provided the most detailed ancient description of mummification in his histories. While writing almost 2,000 years after the practice began, his account aligns remarkably well with what physical evidence from mummies reveals. Herodotus described 3 levels of mummification, corresponding to what the deceased family could afford. The most expensive involved removing the brain through the nose with an iron hook, extracting the internal organs through an incision in the left side, washing the body cavity with palm wine and spices, filling it with myrrh and cassia, and then covering the body in natron for 70 days. Modern scientific analysis confirms these steps. CT scans show the ethmoid bone in the nasal cavity broken in mummies, evidence of brain removal. Chemical residues in body cavities match the substances Herodotus mentioned. The precision and consistency of the technique across centuries indicate this was a highly specialized profession with standardized methods. But why remove certain organs while leaving others? The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were removed and preserved separately in canopic jars, each protected by a different deity, the 4 sons of Horus. The heart, however, was always left in place. This wasn't random, but reflected Egyptian beliefs about the heart's role as the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory. The heart would be needed at judgment. Interestingly, the brain was discarded, considered unimportant. Egyptians believed cognition centered in the heart, not the head. This anatomical misunderstanding didn't diminish the effectiveness of their preservation techniques. Mummies have survived for thousands of years, far longer than bodies preserved by modern methods typically last. Dr. Frank Rulli, director of the Institute of Evolutionary Medicine at the University of Zurich, has conducted extensive research on mummification techniques. His team discovered that the recipes and methods evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated. Early dynasty mummies relied mainly on the desiccating effect of hot sand. By the New Kingdom, embalmers had developed complex chemical treatments that modern chemistry is still working to fully understand. One remarkable discovery came from the University of York in 2018, when researchers found that Egyptian embalmers were using antibacterial agents in their treatments 2,500 years before modern medicine identified bacteria. Molecular analysis revealed compounds with antimicrobial properties, suggesting that ancient Egyptians understood, at least empirically, that something needed to be inhibited to prevent decay. The opening of the mouth ceremony. Once mummification was complete, the body underwent one of the most important rituals in Egyptian religion, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This wasn't a simple blessing, but an elaborate ritual designed to reanimate the deceased's senses and abilities in the afterlife. Evidence for this ceremony comes from numerous sources. The pyramid texts contain the oldest references. The ritual is depicted on tomb walls, particularly in the tomb of Tutankhamun, where a scene shows the ceremony being performed on the king's mummy. A complete description appears in the Book of the Dead and in ritual papyri. The ceremony involved numerous ritual objects, a special adze called a urheka, Grate of Magic, a pesishkaf blade, a ram-headed staff, and sometimes the foreleg of a calf, freshly slaughtered for the ritual. A priest, often the deceased's son, or a professional priest wearing the mask of Anubis, would touch these implements to the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. Each touch was accompanied by specific spells. For the mouth, your mouth is opened by Anubis, with the iron instrument with which he opened the mouths of the gods. For the eyes, you see with your eyes, you hear with your ears. The ritual literally reanimated the corpse, restoring all sensory and physical capabilities that would be needed in the afterlife. The logic was clear. The mummy was a preserved body, but preservation alone didn't equal life. The opening of the mouth transformed an inert corpse into a living being in the afterlife, capable of eating, speaking, moving, and experiencing the world of the dead. Dr. Ann Macy Roth of New York University has studied this ritual extensively, arguing that it represents a form of sacred technology, a precise application of magical principles to achieve a specific result. The ritual tools, she notes, include implements from different crafts: woodworking, metalworking, butchery. This suggests the ritual symbolically involved all the creative forces of civilization in the act of resurrection. Funerary equipment, a traveler's kit for eternity. Imagine preparing for a journey to a distant, dangerous land where you'll spend eternity. What would you pack? For Egyptians, the answer filled entire tombs. The funerary equipment placed in tombs wasn't random, but carefully selected based on what the deceased would need in the afterlife. The richness of Tutankhamun's tomb gives us the most complete picture, but tombs of all classes followed similar principles, scaled to available resources. Shabti figures were essential small mummiform statuettes inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, spell 6. These magical servants would perform labor in the afterlife when the deceased was called to work. Wealthy individuals might have 365 shabtis, one for each day of the year, plus overseer figures to direct them. Poor families might afford only one or two. The principle was the same. No one wanted to spend eternity doing manual labor. Archaeological evidence shows shabtis evolved over time. Early ones were simple stick figures. By the New Kingdom, they were detailed sculptures, often with agricultural tools carved in relief. Some were inscribed with the owner's name and titles, while others named the shabti itself, giving it individuality. Amulets served protective and empowering functions. The heart scarab, placed over the mummified heart, bore, spell 30b from the Book of the Dead. O my heart of my mother, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not rebel against me before the guardians of the balance. This spell prevented the heart from testifying against the deceased during judgment, a magical form of insurance. Other amulets represented specific gods or symbols: the D-Jade pillar stability and Osiris's backbone, the Tiet or Isis knot protection, the Wadjet eye healing and protection, and the scarab resurrection and transformation. Each had a specific purpose, placed at specific locations on the body according to funerary manuals. The hypocephalus, a disc placed under the head of the mummy during the late period, contained images and spells to provide warmth and light in the dark tomb. The Book of the Dead specifies it should be made of linen and placed under the deceased's head, warming it with magical heat. Food offerings included bread, beer, meat, and fowl, standard Egyptian fare. These weren't expected to remain edible forever. Their presence and their depiction on tomb walls ensured the Ka would have sustenance. Chemical analysis of food residues in tombs has confirmed these were actual foods, not symbolic representations. Furniture, clothes, jewelry, weapons, games, and cosmetics filled tombs. Everything a person used in life might be useful in the afterlife. Tomb paintings included scenes of daily life, magically providing estates, servants, and activities for eternity. The inclusion of specific objects reveals Egyptian ideas about the afterlife. Musical instruments suggest music would be enjoyed. Hunting equipment implies hunting would be possible. Board games like Senet, which also had religious significance, symbolizing the journey through the afterlife, would provide entertainment. The Book of the Dead, guidebook for the deceased. No object was more important than the funerary text that provided knowledge for navigating the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, actually titled The Book of Coming Forth by Day in Egyptian, wasn't a single book, but a collection of spells that evolved over centuries. The textual tradition began with the pyramid texts of the Old Kingdom, c. 2000, 686 to 2181 BCE, carved on the walls of pyramids and accessible only to royalty. These are the oldest religious texts in the world, predating the Hebrew Bible by over 1,000 years. The spells focus on the king's ascension to the sky to join the gods, particularly Ra. During the Middle Kingdom c. 2055 to 1650 BCE, these spells were adapted and expanded into the coffin text painted on the wooden coffins of non-royal individuals. This represents that crucial democratization of the afterlife. What was once available only to pharaohs became accessible to anyone who could afford a decorated coffin. By the New Kingdom c. 1550 to 1077 BCE, the tradition evolved into what we call the Book of the Dead, written on papyrus scrolls and placed in the tomb with the deceased. Unlike previous versions carved or painted on tomb furniture, the Book of the Dead was portable, personal, and customizable. No two Books of the Dead are identical. Each was personalized with the deceased's name inserted into the spells. Wealthy individuals commissioned elaborately illustrated copies, like the famous Papyrus of Anisi, 1250 BCE, now in the British Museum, which contains stunning vignettes accompanying each spell. Poorer individuals might purchase a more modest copy or even a second-hand one with the previous owner's name scratched out and their own added. The spells covered every conceivable need in the afterlife. Spell 1 enabled the deceased to leave the tomb and return at will. Spell 2 allowed coming forth by day to walk among the living. Spells 17 through 19 are extensive theological treatises explaining creation and the nature of the gods. Spell 23 enabled opening the mouth. Spell 30b prevented the heart from betraying the deceased at judgment. Spell 125 contained the negative confession and the scene of weighing the heart. Other spells transformed the deceased into various forms. A golden falcon, spell 77, a lotus spell, 81, a phoenix spell, 83. The ability to shapeshift wasn't entertainment, but practical, different situations in the afterlife might require different forms. Many spells provided passwords and names of guardians. The afterlife, as we'll see, was filled with locked gates and hostile beings. Knowing the correct names and phrases could mean the difference between progress and destruction. Spell 144, for instance, lists the 7 gates of the underworld and the 3 names that must be recited at each: the gate itself, the doorkeeper, and the herald. Dr. John Taylor, curator of ancient Egypt and Sudan at the British Museum, has spent decades studying Books of the Dead. His research reveals that these weren't simply bought off the shelf. Scribes consulted with customers to include spells relevant to the individual's concerns. A priest might emphasize spells for religious knowledge, a soldier might want protection spells, a mother might focus on reuniting with deceased children. The papyri themselves are remarkable artifacts. Some stretch over 30 feet long, covered with thousands of hieroglyphs and detailed illustrations. The time and skill required to produce one represented a significant investment. Chemical analysis of the inks and pigments shows that scribes used expensive materials. Carbon black ink, red ochre for rubrics, spell titles, and for the finest copies, genuine gold leaf for highlighting. The tomb eternal house. The tomb itself was called the Eternal House, or House of Eternity. Not a poetic metaphor, but a literal description of its purpose. The tomb was where the Ka dwelled, where the Ba returned each night, where the body rested, and where the living could continue to interact with the deceased through offerings and prayers. Tomb architecture evolved dramatically over Egyptian history. The earliest graves were simple pits in the desert sand. The natural desiccation of the dry sand, preserving bodies accidentally, an effect that may have inspired later deliberate mummification. During the early dynastic period, the mastaba developed a rectangular mud brick structure with a subterranean burial chamber. The name comes from the Arabic word for bench, describing its shape. Mastabas had offering chapels where family could leave food and recite prayers for the deceased. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara, built around 2650 BCE by the legendary architect Imhotep, represented a revolutionary development. It began as a mastaba but was expanded upward in 6 steps, creating a stairway to heaven. This architectural innovation led to the true pyramids of the Old Kingdom Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure at Giza being the most famous. The pyramids weren't egomaniacal vanity projects, as popular imagination sometimes suggests, but religious structures designed to facilitate the pharaoh's resurrection and ascension to the sky. Their geometric perfection, alignment with cardinal directions and specific stars, and the astronomical knowledge embedded in their design demonstrate sophisticated cosmological understanding. Dr. Mark Lehner, who has conducted extensive archaeological work at Giza, has shown that pyramid construction involved not slave labor, but a rotating workforce of skilled and unskilled laborers, fed and housed by the state. Workers' graffiti found in sealed chambers includes team names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, hardly the marks of oppressed slaves. By the New Kingdom, pharaohs abandoned pyramid building for security reasons. The massive monuments advertised the location of treasures within. Instead, they cut tombs deep into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, attempting to hide their burials. Despite these efforts, nearly all were robbed in antiquity. Only Tutankhamun's tomb survived substantially intact, probably because it was modest and its entrance was covered by debris from later tomb construction. Non-royal tombs of the New Kingdom, particularly at sites like Deir el-Medina, the village of the workers who built royal tombs, show remarkable artistry. These craftsmen, knowing they couldn't afford massive tombs, created elaborately decorated burial chambers with sophisticated theological scenes. Their tombs are often better preserved and more beautiful than those of their royal employers. The decoration of tombs followed consistent principles. The eastern wall, where the sun rose, often showed the deceased adoring Ra. The western wall, where the sun set and where the dead entered the underworld, showed scenes from the Book of the Dead. Northern and southern walls depicted daily life activities that the deceased hoped to continue in the afterlife. One tomb practice reveals deep insights into Egyptian thought, the placing of autobiographical inscriptions where visitors could read them. These weren't objective histories, but carefully crafted presentations of the deceased as having lived according to Ma'at. Officials boasted of their justice, generosity, and piety. Not for earthly reputation, they were dead, but to establish their worthiness for eternal life. These biographical texts also served a practical function. They called upon visitors to recite the offering formula, a standard prayer that would magically provide sustenance. O you who live and exist, who love life and hate death, who pass by this tomb going north or south, as you love life and hate death, as your local gods favor you, you shall say, 1,000 of bread, 1,000 of beer, 1,000 of cattle, 1,000 of fowl, for the Ka of name. By reading this aloud, visitors activated magic that fed the deceased Ka, preparing for the journey. With the body mummified, the mouth opened, the tomb equipped, and the Book of the Dead provided, the deceased was as prepared as possible for what lay ahead. But preparation didn't guarantee success. The afterlife was dangerous, filled with obstacles, tests, and the possibility of final destruction. The funeral procession itself was an important ritual, recreating Osiris's funeral. The mummy, in its decorated coffin, was pulled on a sledge to the tomb, accompanied by mourners, priests, and servants carrying the funerary goods. Professional mourners wailed and performed ritual lamentations. The Sim priest, wearing a leopard skin, performed rituals. Carrying the canopic jars containing the viscera were 4 priests representing the sons of Horus. Tomb paintings depict these processions in detail. The journey to the tomb had to cross the Nile, symbolic of the journey to the west, where the sun set and the land of the dead began. Most tombs were on the west bank of the Nile, the side of sunset and death, while cities and temples generally occupied the east bank, the side of sunrise and life. At the tomb, final rituals occurred. The opening of the mouth was performed again, this time before the sealed tomb. Sacrifices were made, cattle slaughtered, their blood and meat offered to the gods and the deceased. A funerary feast might be held, with the living eating in the presence of the dead, affirming the continued connection between the two worlds. Then came sealing the tomb, a moment of finality that must have been emotionally wrenching. The deceased was left in darkness, surrounded by their possessions, their body preserved and protected, their spirit about to embark on the most dangerous journey imaginable. But the living's obligations didn't end at burial. Regular offering rituals were expected. On festival days, families would visit tombs, bringing food, drink, and flowers. They might spend the entire day at the tomb, eating, drinking, even getting drunk, celebrating life in the presence of their ancestors. Wealthier individuals established endowments property whose income would fund perpetual offerings. Contracts with mortuary priests specified exact offerings to be made on specific days. Some of these contracts have survived, providing fascinating glimpses into the economics of eternity. A typical contract might specify 1 loaf of bread, 1 jar of beer, 1 cut of meat to be offered daily, with extra on festival days. Of course, many of these endowments eventually failed as families died out or economic circumstances changed. But the magical backup system of tomb inscriptions and paintings meant that even without physical offerings, the representations would continue to provide sustenance through magic. The Egyptians were nothing if not thorough in their preparation. The moment of transition. The exact moment when death transitioned into afterlife existence remains mysterious in Egyptian texts, deliberately so perhaps. Some texts suggest the transformation occurred at the moment of burial. Others imply a period of sleep or unconsciousness before awakening in the afterlife. Still, others describe the deceased observing their own funeral from a spiritual vantage point. What is clear is that death wasn't seen as passive. The deceased had an active role, using the spells from the Book of the Dead to navigate dangers, defend themselves, and transform as needed. The afterlife wasn't simply granted as a reward. It had to be achieved through knowledge, preparation, and persistence. This active conception of death contrasts sharply with many religious traditions where the deceased is passive, their fate determined entirely by divine judgment. Egyptians believed humans had agency, even in death, that knowledge was power, and that proper preparation could literally make the difference between eternal bliss and eternal destruction. As we leave the tomb sealed, the mummy resting in the darkness, the journey is only beginning. The deceased's ba is stirring, awakening to a new and strange reality. Ahead lies the duat, the underworld, a landscape as complex and diverse as Egypt itself, filled with wonders and terrors, gods and demons, challenges and transformations. The next chapter follows the soul through this mysterious realm, examining what the Egyptians believed awaited them in the geography of death, a landscape mapped in their funerary texts with surprising precision and detail. And Chapter 3, the geography of death. Where exactly did the dead go, and what did they encounter there? Imagine standing at the threshold between life and death, your mummified body sealed in darkness behind you, and before you stretches a vast, unknown landscape, filled with rivers of fire, lakes of demons, gates guarded by knife-wielding monsters, and fields of paradise. This was the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and it was as real to ancient Egyptians as the Nile Valley they inhabited in life. The remarkable feature of Egyptian afterlife belief wasn't vagueness or abstraction. Their texts described the underworld with the precision of a geographical survey, naming regions, measuring distances, identifying inhabitants, and providing detailed maps. This wasn't poetry, it was navigation instructions for the most important journey of existence, the 12 hours of night. The most detailed map of the Duat comes from royal tombs of the New Kingdom, particularly in texts called the Amduat, that which is in the underworld, the Book of Gates, and the Book of Caverns. These weren't versions of the Book of the Dead, but separate compositions reserved initially for pharaohs, though later democratized like other funerary literature. The Amduat, found in the tomb of Thutmose I, 1520 BCE, and most completely in the tomb of Thutmose III, divides the underworld into 12 regions corresponding to the 12 hours of the night. Each hour represented a stage in the sun god Ra's nocturnal journey through the underworld, and by extension, the deceased's journey toward resurrection. The structure is sophisticated. Ra travels in his solar barque boat, accompanied by protective deities, rowing through the underworld from west to east. At dawn, he emerges reborn in the eastern sky. The deceased hope to join this journey, to be renewed each night and emerge each morning as Ra himself was renewed. First hour, the descent. The first hour begins at the western horizon, where the sun sets. Here lies the entrance to the Duat, a region called the opening of the western horizon in the text. The deceased, having left the tomb, arrives at this threshold. The imagery in tomb paintings shows a gateway flanked by divine guardians. The region is populated by baboons, animals sacred to Thoth, who sing hymns welcoming Ra. The text specifies that this hour encompasses 120 Iteru, and Iteru was about 10.5 kilometers, giving the underworld a measurable geography. The deceased must pass through this gate, which requires knowledge of its name and the names of its guardians. This pattern repeats throughout the journey. Knowledge equals power and passage. Those without the proper spells from the Book of the Dead would be turned back or destroyed. Archaeological evidence from tomb paintings shows this scene repeatedly. The deceased appears in the solar bark with Ra, or in their own boat parallel to Ra's. The consistency across hundreds of tombs indicates this wasn't individual imagination, but standardized doctrine. Second and third hours, the waters of Osiris. The second hour brings the deceased to a watery region, the domain of Osiris, in his aspect as Lord of the Nile and provider of fertility. Here, the fields are irrigated by the underworld Nile, and the blessed dead receive plots of land to cultivate. This agricultural imagery reveals much about Egyptian values. Paradise wasn't escape from physical existence, but perfected physical existence. The dead would farm, but in fields that never suffered drought or crop failure, where grain grew to impossible heights and harvest never ended. The third hour contains the region called the Waters of Osiris, where the god's body itself resides, guarded by monstrous serpents. The deceased must navigate carefully here, as the texts warn of dangers from the serpent Apophis, the archenemy of Ra who attempts each night to swallow the sun god and prevent dawn. Dr. Eric Hornung's translation and analysis of the Amduat reveals the theological depth of these images. The waters simultaneously represent fertility, the Nile flood, purification, ritual washing, and danger, drowning, chaos. The deceased must cross these waters to reach resurrection, just as Egypt itself emerged from the waters of creation. Fourth through sixth hours, the depths of night. The middle hours represent the deepest, darkest, most dangerous part of the underworld journey. Here, the challenges intensify. The fourth hour features a difficult passage called the Secret Path of Rostau, which leads to the cavern where Osiris himself resides. The way is blocked by walls of fire and guarded by serpents with deadly breath. The text provides specific spells to cool the flames and neutralize the serpent's poison. The fifth hour contains the mysterious Cavern of Sokar, a god who merged aspects of Osiris and Ptah, representing the ultimate mystery of death and regeneration. This cavern is depicted as a primordial mound surrounded by the serpent body of Apophis. Inside rests Sokar in his manifestation as a mummified hawk. Here, the solar barque cannot proceed by water. The passage is too filled with sand. Instead, divine beings carry the barque overland, a detail that suggests the Egyptians conceived of the underworld as having varied terrain like the physical world. Some parts had rivers, others were desert, creating a complete geography of death. The sixth hour marks the critical moment. Here resides the corpse of Osiris in its most sacred form. The sun god Ra approaches this corpse and merges with it temporarily. This fusion of Ra, the living, moving sun, with Osiris, the dead, stationary king, creates the moment of transformation that will lead to resurrection. Dr. Jan Assmann has called this the most important scene in Egyptian religious iconography. It represents the fundamental mystery. Life emerges from death, movement from stillness, light from darkness. The deceased, witnessing or participating in this moment, receives the same transformative power. Tomb paintings depict this scene with remarkable consistency. The sun disk descends toward the mummy of Osiris. At the moment of contact, the text reads, "The mysterious image of the Duat receives its god. This isn't metaphor, but theology made visual the exact moment when resurrection becomes possible. 7th through 9th hours, the journey toward dawn. Having passed through the deepest darkness and witnessed the mystery of Ra and Osiris's union, the journey now turns toward renewal. These hours show progressively more hopeful imagery. The 7th hour features Apophyse's final assault. The great serpent of chaos attempts to swallow Ra's Barke and prevent dawn. The defensive gods, Isis, Serkate, and others, cast spells that bind Apophis. The deceased participates in this cosmic battle, using spells from the Book of the Dead to help defeat chaos. The vivid description in the text has Apophis pinned down by knives, his segments measured out, he's 450 cubits long, about 230 meters, his evil voice silenced. This isn't gentle mythology, but violent cosmic warfare. The continued existence of order depends on chaos being defeated, and this battle occurs every night, eternally. The 8th hour contains tribunals where enemies of Ra are judged and punished. Tomb paintings show these enemies, those who oppose Ma'at in life, being beheaded, burned, or dismembered. The texts are explicit about their torments. They are hacked up, their souls are kept from them, their corpses do not exist. This is the second death, final annihilation, the ultimate punishment. The 9th hour shows preparation for emergence. Here are stationed the 12 crew members who will row Ra's bark into the dawn sky. The atmosphere shifts from danger to anticipation. The deceased, having survived all trials to this point, begins to sense approaching resurrection. 10th through 12th hours, the rebirth. The 10th hour features divine craftsmen preparing the bodies of the blessed dead for resurrection. They are washed, anointed, clothed in new linen, and made perfect for emerging into day. The 11th hour shows the blessed dead receiving their rewards. They shine like stars. They are given offerings. They speak with powerful voices. The text describes their transfiguration. They have their bread. They have their beer. They are made divine. The 12th hour brings the culmination. Here, the solar bark approaches the eastern horizon. The giant serpent of the underworld swallows the boat, but this swallowing is beneficial, not destructive. The barque passes through the serpent's body and emerges from its mouth transformed. This imagery of death and rebirth through serpent swallowing appears in many cultures, but the Egyptian version is uniquely detailed and consistent. The serpent isn't evil here, but transformative, its body serving as a cosmic birth canal through which Ra and the deceased with him is reborn. The tomb paintings show the sun disk emerging from the serpent's mouth, pulled by the gods of the eastern horizon. Dawn has arrived. The deceased, having completed the 12-hour journey, emerges as an Ach, a transformed and effective spirit, ready to experience the first day of eternal life. The Book of Gates, an alternative geography. The Book of Gates presents a different but complementary map of the Duat. Instead of 12 hours, it focuses on 12 gates, each requiring passwords and guarded by fierce deities. This text, found in the tomb of Horemheb c. 1319 BCE, and other New Kingdom royal tombs, emphasizes the judgment and exclusion of the unworthy. Each gate separates those who know the correct names and spells from those who don't. The gates have wonderful, terrifying names: Mistress of Trembling, Lady of Might, Knife Sharp of Face. Each gate's guardian is described in detail: what they look like, what weapons they carry, what they demand from those seeking passage. Modern readers might find this bureaucratic approach to the afterlife strange, but it reflects Egyptian culture's love of order, names, and proper procedure. Even in death, knowing the right names and following the correct protocol mattered enormously. Dr. Alexandra Pionkov's studies of the Book of Gates reveal sophisticated theology beneath the seemingly mechanical structure. Each gate represents a stage of spiritual purification and transformation. Those who pass through all 12 gates have proven their knowledge, their worthiness, and their ability to maintain Ma'at even in death. The Book of Caverns, the deepest mysteries. The Book of Caverns, found in the tombs of Ramesses IV and Ramesses VI, presents yet another map, dividing the underworld into 6 large caverns or regions, each with multiple subdivisions. This text emphasizes the punishment of the wicked even more than the Book of Gates. Detailed scenes show the enemies of the gods being tortured in pits of fire, cauldrons of boiling liquid, and pools of darkness. These aren't sadistic fantasies, but moral teachings. Those who violate Ma'at face terrible consequences. The caverns also contain the mysterious images of various gods in their underworld forms. The deceased must recognize these forms and address them correctly. This requirement for knowledge suggests that Egyptian afterlife was merit-based in an unusual way, not just moral merit, but intellectual merit. Ignorance could doom you as surely as evil. The fields of paradise, Aru and the ideal afterlife. Beyond the trials and dangers, what awaited the successful? The answer is found in one of the Book of the Dead's most beloved scenes, the Field of Reeds, Seket Aru, often simply called Aru, the Egyptian paradise. Spell 110 of the Book of the Dead describes Aru in detail, and tomb paintings illustrate it beautifully. It was an idealized version of Egypt itself, a place of agricultural abundance where wheat grew 7 cubits high, about 3.5 meters, where the blessed dead farmed perfect fields, sailed pleasure boats, and enjoyed eternal feasting. The Papyrus of Nakht, a scribe from the 18th dynasty, shows a typical depiction. The deceased appears multiple times in the same scene, plowing fields with oxen, harvesting grain, sailing a boat, eating and drinking. The landscape includes channels of water, islands of land, and abundant crops. It's Egypt at its best, made eternal. But notice that paradise involved work. The blessed dead still farmed, still labored, hence the need for Shabti servants to perform the hardest tasks. The Egyptian ideal wasn't idleness, but productive activity in perfect conditions. This reflects a culture that valued work, particularly agricultural work that aligned with the cosmic order of growth and harvest. Aru was located in the east, where the sun rose, beyond the waters that surrounded the world. Reaching it required the deceased to cross these waters, often depicted as a dangerous journey, requiring a divine ferryman who, like the gate's guardians, demanded passwords and knowledge. The ferry scene appears frequently in funerary texts. The ferryman challenges the deceased. "You shall not be transported unless you tell me my name." The deceased must know the names of the ferry, its parts, the oars, the ferryman, and even the water itself. Only with complete knowledge can the crossing succeed. Dr. Ogden Gerlet's commentary on the Book of the Dead explains that this emphasis on naming reflects Egyptian linguistic philosophy. To know the true name of something was to have power over it. Names weren't arbitrary labels, but essential identities. By knowing all the names, the deceased demonstrated mastery over the environment and the right to traverse it. The lake of fire, purification, and power. Not all underworld waters were obstacles. The lake of fire, described in several spells of the Book of the Dead, served as purification for the blessed and destruction for the wicked. This paradoxical body of water that both burns and refreshes reflects sophisticated symbolic thinking. For the righteous, it provided cleansing and empowerment. Spell 126 states, "I am pure in the lake of fire. I am pure in the lake of cool water." The deceased emerges from these lakes renewed and strengthened. For the wicked, the same lakes meant annihilation. The fire consumed them completely, achieving the second death from which there was no resurrection. The dual nature of these waters, salvation or destruction, depending on worthiness, appears throughout Egyptian religious thought. Chemical analysis of tomb paintings has revealed that artists use special pigments for depicting these sacred waters, particularly expensive blue and green pigments made from ground minerals. The visual splendor of these scenes wasn't decorative but theological. The colors themselves had sacred meaning, representing life, fertility, and cosmic order, the demons and guardians of the Duat. The underworld's population wasn't limited to gods and the blessed dead. Countless demons, guardians, and supernatural beings filled the Duat, each with specific roles and characteristics. The demons had wonderfully terrifying names: Swallower of Sinners, Breaker of Bones, Blood Drinker, Face Behind Him, Upside Down of Face. Their appearances matched their names composite. Creatures with animal heads, knives for hands, backward-facing heads, or even more bizarre combinations. These weren't arbitrary monsters, but functionaries in the cosmic order. Each had a job: guarding gates, tormenting the wicked, testing the worthy, or protecting sacred regions. The Book of the Dead provided not just their names, but spells to neutralize or befriend them. Spell 144, for instance, lists 7 gates, each with 3 guardians: the gate itself, the doorkeeper, and the herald. The deceased must address each correctly. O you who guard this gate, I know you and I know your name. The spell then provides the specific names and epithets required. Dr. Kasia Spakowska of Swansea University has studied Egyptian demons extensively, arguing that they represent the Egyptians' sophisticated understanding of the dangerous, unpredictable aspects of existence. Demons embody things like disease, accident, nightmares, and random misfortune forces that couldn't be entirely eliminated but could be managed through knowledge and magic. The presence of demons in the afterlife suggests that Egyptians didn't view death as an escape from life's dangers, but as a transition to a new existence with its own challenges. The afterlife required continued vigilance, knowledge, and proper behavior. It wasn't passive eternal rest, but active eternal existence. The mysterious inhabitants, the blessed dead, and the damned. The underworld's human population divided into distinct categories, each with different fates and locations. The justified, or true of voice, Macheru, were those who passed judgment successfully. They resided in Aru, or near Osiris, enjoying eternal life. Tomb paintings show them dressed in fine linen, wearing the youth cone, a mysterious conical object worn on the head at festivals, feasting, and engaging in pleasurable activities. The enemies were those who failed judgment, or who actively opposed the gods and Ma'at during life. Their fate was horrifying and explicit in the text. They were overturned, slaughtered, burned, dismembered. The Book of Gates shows them upside down in pits, being decapitated by demons, or consumed in lakes of fire. This wasn't cruel divine vengeance, but cosmic necessity. Those aligned with Isfit chaos couldn't be allowed to exist, as they would undermine the fundamental order of the universe. Their complete annihilation, the second death, removed them from existence entirely, their names forgotten, their souls destroyed. A middle category existed too, the weary ones or the weak. These seemed to be deceased who weren't evil enough for destruction, but weren't knowledgeable or worthy enough for paradise. Their fate is unclear in the text, but they appear to exist in a diminished state, perhaps as servants to the gods or wandering spirits. Dr. Leonard Lesko's studies of Egyptian afterlife democracy reveal interesting social dimensions. In theory, anyone who lived according to Ma'at could reach paradise. In practice, the expense of proper burial, mummification, and funerary texts meant the poor had less chance of success. However, evidence from workers' villages like Deir el-Medina shows even modest artisans invested heavily in afterlife preparation, suggesting the hope of paradise extended across social classes. The underworld as cosmic womb. One of the most profound interpretations of the Duat comes from analysis of its symbolic role as a place of gestation and rebirth. The deceased entered the underworld as a corpse and emerged as a renewed, transformed being, a process analogous to birth. The imagery supports this interpretation. The serpent swallowing and birthing Ra in the 12th hour functions as a birth canal. The waters the deceased must cross recall amniotic fluid. The 70 days of mummification match the approximate period of human gestation. The emergence into day mirrors an infant emerging into the world. Dr. Geraldine Pinch of Cambridge University has explored these birth metaphors extensively, noting that Egyptian culture was remarkably open about the parallels between death and birth. Both were transitions between states of being, both required passage through dangerous liminal spaces, and both resulted in a new form of existence. The goddess Nut, the sky, was often depicted inside coffin lids, her body arching over the deceased. Her role was explicitly maternal. She would swallow the dead in the west at sunset and give birth to them in the east at dawn, just as she swallowed and birthed the sun each day. The deceased literally entered the goddess's body and were reborn from it. This conception of death as rebirth, rather than ending, fundamentally shaped Egyptian attitudes. Death was natural, necessary, and potentially joyful. The pain and danger of the journey were justified by the new life that followed, just as the pain of childbirth was justified by the new life it brought forth. The geography changes over time. The conception of the Duat wasn't static but evolved over Egypt's long history, reflecting changing theological emphases and political situations. During the Old Kingdom, the pyramid texts emphasized the sky as the deceased's destination. The king ascended to join the circumpolar stars, the imperishable ones that never set, or to sail with Ra in the solar barque. The underworld was less developed as a concept. The Middle Kingdom brought democratization and the rise of Osiris. The coffin text shifted emphasis from celestial ascension to underworld journey and judgment. The duat became more detailed, more dangerous, and more central to afterlife belief. The New Kingdom saw the fullest elaboration of underworld geography with the Amduat, Book of Gates, and Book of Caverns. Royal tombs became illustrated guides to this cosmic landscape, with every wall covered in detailed maps and descriptions. The late period and Ptolemaic era brought synthesis and elaboration. New funerary texts combined elements from earlier traditions. The Book of Breathing, the Book of Traversing, Eternity, and other compositions adapted ancient spells for new contexts. This evolution shows Egyptian religion wasn't fossilized tradition, but living theology that adapted to changing needs and understandings while maintaining core principles. The fundamental beliefs, survival after death, judgment based on moral conduct, resurrection through knowledge and ritual, remained constant, even as details shifted. Archaeological evidence for these beliefs. Skeptics might wonder if these elaborate underworld geographies were merely priestly inventions, theological speculations divorced from genuine belief. The archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. The massive investment in tomb construction and decoration demonstrates that these weren't abstract philosophies, but deeply held convictions that shaped behavior and resource allocation. The Great Pyramid of Khufu required an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, decades of labor, and enormous economic resources inconceivable unless the religious motivation was genuine and powerful. The consistency of iconography across centuries and social classes indicates standardized teaching and widely shared beliefs. A scene in a royal tomb appears in similar form in a worker's tomb hundreds of years later, suggesting common instruction and common faith. The personal nature of many tomb inscriptions reveals individual conviction, not just rote formulas. The autobiography of Harkhuf, an expedition leader of the 6th dynasty, asks future visitors to recite offerings for him if you love life and hate death. A plea that makes sense only if he genuinely believed those offerings would sustain him in the afterlife. The letter to the dead, written messages placed in tombs asking deceased family members for help or expressing grievances, show people interacting with the dead as if they were alive in another location. These weren't public documents, but private communications, suggesting genuine belief that the dead could hear, understand, and act on behalf of the living. Dr. Edward Wente's collection and analysis of letters to the dead reveals fascinating glimpses of personal belief. A widow writes to her deceased husband, asking him to stop haunting her dreams. A man complains to his dead father that the father hasn't protected him from enemies. These aren't theological treatises, but emotional appeals that make sense only if the writers truly believed the dead existed in an afterlife where they could be contacted and influenced. The journey continues. Having mapped the geography of the Duat, having witnessed the trials and transformations, having seen paradise and punishment, we understand where Egyptians believed the dead traveled. But knowledge of the territory doesn't guarantee safe passage. The most critical moment of the entire afterlife journey still awaits the judgment before Osiris in the Hall of Two Truths, where the deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, where truth is tested and fate is decided, where the difference between eternal life and utter destruction hangs in the balance. This is the climax of the Egyptian afterlife journey, the moment all preparation and knowledge has been building toward, and it reveals the moral and ethical heart of Egyptian religion in ways no other scene can match. Lokhtavit 1, Let, Chapter 4. The weighing of the heart. Could magic and ritual really overcome a lifetime of evil? Or did true justice prevail? The Hall of Two Truths stood at the culmination of the underworld journey, the ultimate test that would determine whether all the preparation, all the spells, all the elaborate rituals had been worthwhile. Here, before 42 divine judges and the supreme tribunal of the gods, the deceased's entire moral existence would be evaluated in a single, decisive procedure, the weighing of the heart. This scene, depicted more frequently than any other in Egyptian funerary art, reveals the civilization's deepest ethical convictions. It wasn't simply about appeasing gods through sacrifice or performing correct rituals. At the core of Egyptian religion was a belief that morality mattered, that actions had consequences, and that justice, ma'at, was the fundamental principle governing existence both in life and after death. The architecture of judgment, spell 125 of the Book of the Dead, provides the most complete description of the judgment scene, and countless papyri and tomb paintings illustrate it. The consistency of these depictions across centuries indicates this wasn't artistic license, but sacred canon that had to be rendered accurately. The hall itself was vast and sacred, its walls described as being made of fire or lapis lazuli, its floor of perfect ma'at. At the far end sat Osiris on his throne, wrapped in mummy bindings, holding the crook and flail of kingship. His skin was typically shown as green, resurrection, or black, the fertile Nile silt, and the transformation of death. Behind and beside Osiris stood the divine witnesses, Isis and Nephthys, his faithful wives and protectors, the 42 divine judges of the dead, each representing one of Egypt's provinces and each responsible for judging one particular sin, and sometimes other gods, including Ra, Thoth, Anubis, and Ma'at herself. The center of the hall contained the Great Balance, a set of scales that would determine the deceased's fate. This wasn't metaphorical. Egyptians depicted it as a physical object with two pans suspended from a central beam, precisely the type of scale used in marketplaces to weigh goods. The cosmic judgment employed the same mechanism as commercial honesty, suggesting that Ma'at applied equally to small daily transactions and ultimate divine evaluation. Guarding the scales stood Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, who served as the psychopomp, the guide of souls, and the technical operator of the balance. His role was to ensure accurate measurement, to prevent any cheating or error. Given that Anubis had prepared the deceased's body through mummification, there's a beautiful symmetry in him also testing the deceased's heart. Nearby waited Ammit, the devourer, perhaps the most terrifying figure in Egyptian mythology. Depicted as a composite creature with the head of a crocodile, the forepart of a leopard or lion, and the rear of a hippopotamus, combining three of the most dangerous animals in Egypt, Ammit sat near the scales, ready to consume the hearts of those who failed the test. This wasn't a demon or evil entity, but a neutral force of cosmic justice, eliminating those unfit for eternal life. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, stood ready with his scribal palette to record the results. As the god of measurement, mathematics, and truth, Thoth's presence ensured accuracy and fairness. His record was final and irrevocable. The weighing process, the actual procedure, as depicted in hundreds of sources, followed a precise sequence. The deceased, often led by Anubis, approached the scales. In one pan of the balance was placed the deceased's heart, eye, the physical organ left in the body during mummification precisely for this moment. The heart wasn't chosen arbitrarily. Egyptian physiology located all thought, emotion, memory, and moral character in the heart. Unlike modern Western thought that places consciousness in the brain, Egyptians saw the heart as the core of the self. It was the organ that knew the truth about who you really were and what you had really done. In the opposite pan sat the feather of Ma'at, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. The feather was light, simple, pure, an elegant counterweight to the heart that had lived through all the complications, temptations, and moral challenges of a lifetime. Anubis adjusted the scales and observed the balance. This was the moment of ultimate truth. If the heart balanced exactly with the feather, if it was justified or true of voice, ma, keru, the deceased passed the test. If the heart was heavy, weighed down with sin, selfishness, and violations of ma'at, it would tip the scales and reveal the person's unworthiness. The visual depictions almost always show the scales in perfect balance, because these are images from tombs and papyri commissioned by the deceased or their families. No one would pay for artwork showing their own failure, but the texts make clear that failure was a real possibility, not just theological abstraction. The role of the heart scare becomes clear in this context. Spell 30b from the Book of the Dead, inscribed on the scarab and placed over the heart during mummification, reads, "O my heart of my mother, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not oppose me in the tribunal." Do not rebel against me before the guardians of the balance. Do not make my name stink to the entourage who make people. This spell has puzzled and troubled some scholars. Is it magical cheating, attempting to prevent the heart from testifying truthfully? Or is it a prayer for the heart to accurately reflect the deceased's best self rather than temporary moral failures? Dr. Jan Osman argues it's the latter, a recognition that human beings are complex and contradictory, that everyone has moments of weakness alongside their better nature. The spell asks that the essential character, not isolated failures, be what the heart reveals. It's not asking for lies, but for justice tempered with understanding. The negative confession. Before the weighing, the deceased had to make the negative confession or declaration of innocence, a statement to the 42 divine judges that they had not committed specific sins. The structure was formulaic but profound. The deceased addressed each judge by name and title, declaring one sin they had not committed. O wide of stride who comes from Heliopolis, I have not done wrong. O flame embracer who come from Karaha, I have not robbed. O nosy who come from Hermopolis, I have not been rapacious. The list of 42 declarations provides invaluable insight into Egyptian ethics. The sins prohibited included murder and violence. I have not killed. I have not ordered killing. Theft and dishonesty. I have not stolen. I have not committed fraud. I have not given short measure. Sexual misconduct. I have not committed adultery. I have not had homosexual relations, though this prohibition is debated by scholars. Blasphemy and sacrilege. I have not blasphemed against God. I have not stolen temple offerings. Social offenses. I have not caused pain. I have not made anyone cry. I have not caused fear. Agricultural crimes. I have not diverted water, a serious offense in an irrigation-dependent society. I have not driven cattle from their pasture. Dishonest behavior. I have not told lies. I have not eavesdropped. I have not gossiped. Emotional sins. I have not been angry without cause. I have not been deaf to words of truth. Metaphysical violations. I have not made heavy the balance. Cheating in commerce. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. The comprehensive nature of this list reveals a sophisticated moral system addressing not just obvious crimes, but subtle ethical violations, causing unnecessary pain, making someone cry, even being angry without good reason. These emotional and social infractions mattered as much as theft or murder. The negative formulation, I have not, rather than positive claims, I have, suggests Egyptian ethics emphasized avoiding wrong as much as actively doing right. However, some versions include positive declarations. I have done what people approve and what the gods are pleased with. I have given bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothes to the naked. Dr. Miriam Lichtheim's study of Egyptian moral literature shows these weren't just funerary formulas, but reflected actual ethical teaching. Wisdom texts like the instructions of Ptahhotep, the instructions of Amenemop, and numerous biographical inscriptions promote the same values: honesty, kindness, self-control, justice, and respect for both human and divine order. The question of magical cheating, the heart scarab spell, and the elaborate preparation raise an uncomfortable question. Was Egyptian judgment genuine moral evaluation? Or could the rich buy their way into paradise through expensive magical texts and amulets? The evidence suggests a both, an answer rather than either or. Egyptians believed magic was real and effective, but they also believed it worked within the framework of cosmic law, not outside it. Magic could help the genuinely worthy, but couldn't fundamentally transform the evil into the good. The Book of the Dead wasn't a cheat sheet, but a guidebook. It provided knowledge and preparation, but it couldn't change the fundamental reality of whether someone had lived according to Ma'at. The spells empowered the righteous, but couldn't save the wicked from their own hearts. Consider the practicality. The heart itself was weighed. The texts make clear this was the physical organ removed from the body during mummification and replaced for judgment. No spell could change what the heart actually contained, the moral weight accumulated through a lifetime of choices. The role of confession is significant here. By declaring what they had not done, the deceased put their claims on record before the gods. Divine omniscience would know if they lied. The gods weren't fooled by magical formulas or expensive papyri. Dr. Robert Rittner, an expert on Egyptian magic, argues that the relationship between magic and ethics in Egypt was complementary, not contradictory. Magic assisted those who deserved assistance. It was another form of knowledge, another tool for navigating existence. But it operated under divine supervision and couldn't override cosmic justice. The wealthy certainly had advantages: better preservation through expensive mummification, more complete books of the dead, more elaborate tombs. But the fundamental test remained the same for everyone. Had you lived according to Ma'at? The text insists that moral conduct, not social status or magical knowledge alone, determined the outcome. The moment of verdict. Thoth recorded the result of the weighing. The scales balanced the heart, weighed exactly the same as the feather. Anubis announced to Osiris, "The weighing has been done in our presence, and his heart has been found true upon the great balance. No sin has been found in him." Osiris, having heard the negative confession, having witnessed the weighing, having received Thoth's record, pronounced judgment. "Let him be given bread and beer from the altar of Osiris. Let him appear before the god like the followers of Horus." This was the verdict of justification. The deceased was declared true of voice, Ma'acheru, their heart proven pure, their moral worth established. They could proceed to the rewards of the afterlife, the fields of Aru, the boat of Ra, the company of the gods, eternal life in perfected form. The title, True of Voice, is significant. Voice represented power, the ability to speak creation into being as the gods did. To be declared true of voice meant one's words had cosmic weight. One's voice participated in the creative and sustaining power of Ma'at itself. It was an extraordinary elevation of the human being to semi-divine status. The justified dead could now use their voices to activate all the magic in their funerary texts, to command demons and guardians, to navigate the duat with authority. They weren't supplicants or victims, but empowered beings whose righteousness gave them legitimate power. The fate of the unjustified. What happened to those who failed? The texts are brutally clear. If the heart proved heavy with sin, if the scales tipped against the deceased, if their negative confession was revealed as lies, they faced the second death, complete and utter annihilation. Amit's role was immediate and final. The crocodile-headed devourer consumed the heart, and with it, the essential self. Without the heart, the other components of the person, Ka, Ba, shadow, name, couldn't function or reunite. The individual ceased to exist in any form, their name forgotten, their accomplishments erased, their consciousness extinguished forever. This wasn't temporary punishment or purgatorial suffering, but absolute termination. There was no hell of eternal torment in Egyptian belief, though the Book of Gates and Book of Caverns show temporary punishments for the enemies of the gods. The ultimate punishment was non-existence, erasure from the cosmos, the complete reversal of creation. The terror of this fate can't be overstated. For a culture that valued memory, accomplishment, and leaving a lasting legacy, to be utterly forgotten and destroyed was the worst imaginable outcome. It made the eternal life of the justified all the more precious by contrast. Some texts suggest alternative fates for different categories of the unjustified. Those who were merely ignorant or weak might become servants in the underworld, existing but diminished. Those who actively opposed Ma'at and the gods faced the torments depicted in the punishment scenes: burning, dismemberment, and eventually destruction. The specificity of punishments in some texts suggests they match the crimes. Those who stole might have their hands cut off in the afterlife. Those who lied might have their tongues removed. Those who blasphemed might be burned. This concept of appropriate retribution shows sophisticated thinking about justice as proportional response rather than arbitrary cruelty. Dr. Emily Teeter notes that Egyptian religion maintained an optimistic view despite these terrifying possibilities. The assumption in the text is that most people will pass judgment if they've made proper preparations and lived reasonably ethical lives. The elaborate funerary industry existed because people believed they could succeed, not because they expected to fail. The ethical revolution. The judgment scene represents a remarkable development in human religious thought. Scholars have called it one of the first clear articulations of moral judgment after death based on ethical behavior rather than simply ritual correctness or social status. In the early Old Kingdom, the pyramid text suggests the pharaoh's divine status automatically guaranteed him a place among the gods. Judgment wasn't necessary for one who was himself divine. But even in these early texts, hints appear that moral conduct mattered. The king is he who eats what Ma'at gives. By the Middle Kingdom, the democratization of the afterlife brought the democratization of judgment. If commoners could reach the afterlife, there needed to be a mechanism to determine who deserved it. The judgment scene evolved to fill this theological need. The emphasis on personal moral conduct rather than hereditary status or priestly intervention was revolutionary. A poor farmer who lived honestly and justly could achieve what a corrupt official could not, regardless of the quality of their respective burials. The heart didn't care about gold or status, only about truth. This principle appears explicitly in some texts. The instruction of Amenemope, a wisdom text from the New Kingdom, states, "Better is poverty in the hand of God than wealth in the storehouse. Better is bread with a happy heart than wealth with vexation." The text argues that moral virtue transcends material circumstances. Dr. Miriam Littheim has argued that this ethical emphasis influenced later religious traditions, though direct lines of transmission remain debated. The concept of weighing souls against a standard of righteousness, of moral judgment after death, of rewards for the just, and punishment for the wicked, these ideas appear in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all of which had contact with Egyptian culture. The famous psychostasia scene in Greek mythology, where Hermes weighs souls, may derive from Egyptian influence. The Zoroastrian Chinvat Bridge, where souls are judged, shows parallels. The Christian Final Judgment and Islamic Mizan, the Scales of Justice, echo similar themes. Whether direct influence or independent development, the Egyptian judgment scene represents an early, sophisticated articulation of moral accountability that resonates across religious traditions. The social function of judgment. Beyond theological significance, the judgment scene served important social functions in Egyptian society. It provided a cosmic foundation for earthly ethics and justice. If everyone would face judgment after death, everyone had an incentive to live ethically, regardless of whether they could escape earthly punishment for wrongdoing. The gods saw what human judges might miss. The heart couldn't be bribed or deceived. Ultimate justice was inevitable. This belief supported social order. Legal texts and administrative documents invoke Ma'at constantly. Officials swore oaths before Ma'at. Judges were called priests of Ma'at. The connection between cosmic order and social order was explicit and foundational. The tomb autobiographies of officials emphasized their justice and ethical conduct. These weren't merely boasts, but claims that would be tested after death. Harkhuf, the explorer, claims he brought all gifts safely, spoke truth, did Ma'at. The official Ankh-Tfi states, "I gave bread to the hungry, clothes to the naked," echoing the positive ethical standards that judgment required. The fact that officials felt compelled to make these claims publicly suggests social expectations aligned with theological requirements. A person's reputation in life anticipated their judgment in death. To be known as unjust or dishonest was not just socially shameful, but spiritually dangerous. Dr. Antonio Loprieno's work on Egyptian literature shows that the judgment scene appeared not just in funerary texts, but in moral teaching, literature, and even administrative documents. It pervaded the culture, shaping behavior and expectations at every social level. The paradox of judgment and salvation. A tension exists in Egyptian thought between judgment based on merit and salvation through knowledge and ritual. Can these be reconciled? Some scholars see them as contradictory, representing different theological traditions awkwardly combined. Others argue they're complementary aspects of a sophisticated soteriology, doctrine of salvation. The synthesis might go like this. Living according to Ma'at is necessary, but not sufficient. One must also have knowledge, knowing the spells, names, and procedures for navigating the afterlife. And one must have the ritual preparations, mummification, proper burial, offering cult. Conversely, knowledge and ritual are useless without moral foundation. The heart cannot be deceived, the scales cannot be cheated. All the magic in the world cannot save someone who has genuinely violated Ma'at. So the three elements, ethics, knowledge, and ritual, form an integrated whole. Each is necessary. All together are sufficient. This isn't contradictory but complex, recognizing that salvation isn't a simple transaction but a multifaceted achievement. Dr. John Osman calls this connective justice, the idea that righteousness connects the individual to Ma'at, to the gods, and to eternal life. Unrighteousness disconnects, isolates, and ultimately destroys. Judgment reveals and confirms the connections or disconnections that the person's life has created. Modern perspectives on the weighing. Contemporary scholars and readers approach the judgment scene with varied perspectives. Some see it as primitive moralism, anthropomorphizing divine justice in crude ways. Others recognize it as profound ethical philosophy expressed through mythic imagery. Psychological interpretations view the weighing as a projection of conscience, the internal moral sense externalized as divine judgment. The heart that testifies against the deceased represents guilt, the knowledge of one's own moral failures that can't be hidden or denied. From this perspective, Amit represents not an external demon, but the self-destructive consequences of immoral living. Those who violate Ma'at destroy themselves. Amit is merely the mythic personification of that inevitable result. Literary critics note the dramatic power of the scene, the visual simplicity of the scales, the stark binary of balance or imbalance, the terrible finality of the devourer waiting, its theatrical theology, truth conveyed through unforgettable imagery. Comparative religion scholars place the Egyptian judgment in context with other cultures' afterlife beliefs. The Egyptian version stands out for its emphasis on moral conduct over ritual purity, its accessibility across social classes, at least in theory, and its detailed procedural specificity. Art historians study the evolution of the scene's iconography. Early Middle Kingdom versions are simple, with basic scales and few figures. New Kingdom versions become elaborate, with dozens of deities, complex architectural settings, and rich symbolic details. Late period versions sometimes show Greek artistic influences while maintaining Egyptian theological content. All these perspectives enrich understanding without exhausting the scene's significance. It remains a powerful expression of humanity's perennial questions about justice, morality, death, and ultimate accountability. The justified soul's reward, having passed judgment, declared true of voice, the deceased could finally experience the rewards for which all the preparation had been undertaken. These rewards weren't vague spiritual abstractions, but specific, concrete experiences described in detail in the funerary texts. First, the justified could approach Osiris directly, sitting in his presence, speaking with him. Given that Osiris was the king of the afterlife and a god, this was extraordinary access and honor. The deceased became part of Osiris's court, a member of the divine community. Second, they received sustenance, the bread and beer from Osiris's altar mentioned in the judgment. This wasn't symbolic, but actual nourishment that sustained the Ka for eternity. The offerings made by living relatives supplemented this divine provision. Third, they gained freedom of movement. They could travel through the Duat, visit the land of the living, transform into various forms, birds, flowers, snakes, and participate in the daily solar journey with Ra. Mobility was a key feature of blessed existence. Fourth, they resided in Aru, the field of reeds, enjoying agricultural abundance, pleasant climate, and freedom from the hardships that plagued earthly farming. Work was light and productive, harvest was plentiful, and the threat of famine or drought was eliminated. Fifth, they could participate in divine activities. Some texts describe the justified helping Ra fight Apophis each night, defending cosmic order against chaos. Others show them serving the gods in various capacities. Rather than diminishing their status, this service elevated them to cosmic significance. Their actions literally helped maintain the universe. Sixth, they achieved reunion. Family members who had died earlier and passed judgment were together in the afterlife. The blessed dead formed a community, not isolated individuals. Tomb prayers often express hope of seeing beloved family members again. Seventh, they possess magical power. As true of voice, their words had creative force. They could speak spells and command reality, approaching, though never equaling, the god's own creative speech. Eighth, and perhaps most important, they had eternity itself. There was no second death for the justified, no end to their blessed existence. Time stretched forward infinitely, and they would experience it all in youthful vigor and perfect health. These rewards combined physical and spiritual elements, reflecting Egyptian belief that both body and soul deserved eternal happiness. The afterlife wasn't escape from the world, but the world perfected Egypt. Without its dangers and disappointments, existence without death, the ongoing relationship between living and dead. Judgment wasn't the end of the deceased story or the living's obligations. Egyptian religion maintained a complex, ongoing relationship between the two realms. The living were expected to maintain offering cults, visiting tombs on festival days, bringing food and drink, reciting the offering formula. These actions literally sustained the dead, providing the sustenance their kas needed. In return, the dead could intercede for the living. They had access to the gods, could carry prayers and petitions to divine ears, and could use their magical powers to help or harm the living. A properly honored ancestor was a powerful ally. A neglected or angered ancestor could cause serious problems. The letters to the dead mentioned earlier show this dynamic. The living wrote to deceased family members asking for help with problems, illness, infertility, legal disputes, nightmares. The letters were placed in the tomb or on offering tables, allowing the dead to read and respond. One touching letter from the Middle Kingdom shows a widow defending herself to her deceased husband, who apparently is causing her trouble through nightmares or hauntings. What have I done against you that I should come to this evil state I am in? What have I done to you? What you have done is to lay hands on me, although I had not done anything bad to you. The emotional authenticity of such letters suggests genuine belief that the dead were active, aware, and capable of affecting the living for good or ill. The afterlife wasn't a distant heaven, but a parallel realm that intersected with daily existence. Dr. Ogden Golet observes that this ongoing relationship meant death wasn't a complete separation. Family bonds persisted beyond the grave, obligations continued, communication remained possible. The Egyptians had, in effect, extended their society to include both living and dead members, all still connected and interacting. This belief had practical effects. Tombs were maintained for generations, offerings continued long after the person's death, and the dead remained part of family consciousness and identity. Ancestor veneration wasn't worship, but ongoing family relationship. And so, by Chapter 5, the divine hierarchy and cosmic order. How did hundreds of gods coexist without contradicting each other? To modern minds accustomed to monotheistic religions with their emphasis on a single, consistent deity, the Egyptian pantheon presents a bewildering spectacle. Hundreds of gods and goddesses, overlapping roles, conflicting myths, local and national deities existing simultaneously. How did Egyptians make sense of this theological abundance? More importantly, did they see it as contradictory, or did they have a different understanding of divine reality? The answer reveals a sophisticated religious philosophy that embraced complexity rather than simplifying it, that understood divine reality as multifaceted rather than monolithic, and that saw the proliferation of deities not as confusion, but as a more complete representation of the sacred. The principle of multiplicity in unity. Egyptologist Eric Hornung revolutionized the study of Egyptian religion with his concept of aspectival thinking. He argued that Egyptians didn't see contradictions where modern scholars saw them. Instead, they understood that complex realities could only be adequately described from multiple perspectives, each true in its own way. Consider the sun god. He could be Ra, the supreme solar deity. He could be Atum, the creator who emerged from the primordial waters. He could be Capri, the scarab beetle representing the dawn sun. He could be Atum-Ra, combining creator and sun. He could be Amun-Ra, combining the hidden primordial force with the visible sun. He could be Ra-Horakti, combining the sun god with Horus of the horizon. These weren't different gods, but different aspects, different manifestations, different ways of understanding the solar divine power. The sun's emergence at dawn, Capri, was a different sacred moment from its blazing at noon, Ra, or its setting in the west. Yet all were the same fundamental divine reality. This flexibility appears in other deities too. Hathor could be the sky goddess, the mother goddess, the goddess of love and joy, the goddess of drunkenness, and the terrifying destroyer goddess all simultaneously, all genuinely, without contradiction. The key is that Egyptians didn't demand systematic theology in the modern sense. They didn't require all statements about the gods to fit into a single consistent framework. Different cult centers could have different creation myths, all accepted as true. Different traditions could assign different parentage to the same god, all valid. Dr. John Baines of Oxford has argued that this theological flexibility served important social and political functions. As Egypt unified different regions, each with their own local deities and traditions, the solution wasn't to eliminate local beliefs, but to incorporate them into a larger system. Local gods could be identified with national gods, local myths could be harmonized with royal theology, and everyone's tradition could find a place, the local and the universal. Egyptian religion operated on multiple scales simultaneously: local, regional, and national. Each village might have its own deity who was the primary focus of local worship. Each region had important cult centers with their own major gods, and the national level involved the great gods worshipped throughout Egypt. These levels didn't contradict, but complemented each other. A farmer in a small village might primarily worship a local crocodile god who protected fishermen, but also acknowledge Sobek, the national crocodile god, and also venerate Ra and Osiris at appropriate times. Archaeological evidence from villages like Deir el-Medina shows this multi-layered religious practice. Workers' tombs include depictions of major national gods like Osiris and Ra, but also show veneration of local protective deities and even deified humans like Amenhotep I, who became a patron god of the workers' village centuries after his death. The household religion, revealed by amulets, votive objects, and domestic shrines, adds another layer. Families worship gods particularly relevant to their concerns: Bez and Tauret for protection during childbirth, Thoth for scribes, Ptah for craftsmen, Hathor for women's concerns. This multiplicity reflects the reality of human life. Different situations call for different divine powers. The god appropriate for ensuring a good harvest might not be the god you'd invoke for healing a sick child or protecting a traveler. Rather than one all-purpose deity, Egyptians had specialized divine help for specific needs. Dr. Emily Teeter's research on popular religion in Egypt shows that ordinary people's religious practice was pragmatic and syncretic. They used whatever divine help was available and effective, combining official religion with local traditions, accepted practices with personal innovations, priestly theology with household magic. This wasn't religious confusion, but sophisticated understanding that the sacred manifested in many forms at many levels in response to many different needs. The problem of syncretism. Syncretism, the combination of different deities into composite forms, was common in Egyptian religion and sometimes bewildering to modern students. Amun-Ra, Rahoraki, Ptah, Sokar, Osiris, Mut, Isis, Nekbet. These hyphenated deities seem to violate the principle that a god is a distinct being. But from the Egyptian perspective, these combinations revealed the underlying connections between different divine powers. When Amun was combined with Ra to become Amun-Ra, it didn't mean that Amun and Ra ceased to exist separately. Rather, it recognized that the hidden creative force, Amun, and the visible life-giving sun, Ra, were intimately connected, perhaps ultimately aspects of the same divine reality. Syncretism often had political dimensions. When Thebes became the capital during the Middle Kingdom, its local god Amun rose to national prominence. Combining him with the already supreme Ra, creating Amun-Ra elevated Amun while maintaining Ra's traditional supremacy. It was theological diplomacy. Similarly, when the Greeks ruled Egypt after Alexander's conquest, they created Serapis, a combination of Osiris and the Greek-Egyptian Apis bull, with characteristics of Greek gods like Zeus and Hades. This syncretic deity allowed Greeks and Egyptians to worship together, finding common ground while maintaining their own traditions. Syncretism could also express theological insights. The combination Ptah-Sokar-Osiris brought together the creator god Ptah, the mysterious death god Sokar, and the resurrected god Osiris. This trinity expressed the complete cycle of creation, death, and resurrection in a single divine form. Dr. David Frankfurter has argued that syncretism was one of Egyptian religion's great strengths, allowing it to absorb new influences, adapt to changing circumstances, and find unity in diversity. It made Egyptian religion remarkably resilient and long-lasting. The great theological systems. Despite the apparent chaos of hundreds of deities, Egyptian priests developed several sophisticated theological systems that organized the divine realm into coherent structures. The Heliopolitan system, centered on the sun god Ra-Atum, and the Ennead 9 gods, presented a creation account and divine genealogy that became extremely influential. This system appears in the pyramid texts and remained important throughout Egyptian history. The Memphite theology, preserved in the Shabaka stone, a 25th dynasty copy of an older text, presented Ptah as the supreme creator who thought creation into existence through his heart, mind, and spoke it into being through his tongue, word. This intellectualized creation account has been compared to Logos theology in Greek philosophy and the Gospel of John's "In the beginning was the Word." The Hermopolitan system featured 8 primordial deities, the Ogdoad representing 4 pairs of opposite qualities: hiddenness and revelation, darkness and light, formlessness and form, etc. These 8 brought forth the sun from the primordial lotus flower, beginning creation. The Theban theology elevated Amun as the king of the gods, the hidden source of all creation. Extensive hymns to Amun from the New Kingdom describe him in almost monotheistic terms as the sole divine reality of which other gods are manifestations. These different systems coexisted without Egyptians feeling compelled to choose one and reject the others. Each revealed important truths about creation and divine nature from different perspectives. The role of the pharaoh in the divine order. The pharaoh occupied a unique position in Egyptian theology, simultaneously human and divine, mortal and immortal, subject and sovereign. Understanding this paradoxical status is essential to grasping how Egyptian religion functioned in practice. The pharaoh was considered the living Horus, the son of Ra, the beloved of Ma'at. Upon death, he became Osiris, while his successor became the new Horus. This created an unbroken chain of divine kingship stretching back to the gods themselves. But the pharaoh was also clearly human. He aged, became ill, and died. Royal inscriptions acknowledged this mortality even while asserting divinity. The solution to this apparent contradiction was that the pharaoh possessed both a human nature and a divine Ka, a royal essence that was genuinely godlike. The pharaoh's divine role had practical cosmic consequences. He was responsible for maintaining Ma'at throughout the land. His rituals ensured the sun rose, the Nile flooded, and order prevailed over chaos. Temple inscriptions show the pharaoh performing daily rituals to sustain the gods themselves, providing them with offerings and worship. In practice, of course, priests performed these rituals on the pharaoh's behalf, but the theological principle remained: the king was the sole legitimate intermediary between humanity and the gods. Every temple ritual was theoretically performed by the pharaoh, with priests acting as his proxies. This concentration of religious authority had enormous political implications. To oppose the pharaoh was to oppose Ma'at itself, to ally with chaos and destruction. The divine status of the kingship provided powerful legitimization for royal authority. Dr. David O'Connor's research on Egyptian kingship reveals that this ideology was carefully constructed and maintained through art, architecture, and ritual. Colossal statues showed the pharaoh at superhuman scale. Temple reliefs depicted him defeating enemies and worshiping gods. Coronation rituals literally transformed the new king into Horus, yet the system also imposed obligations on the pharaoh. He couldn't simply rule arbitrarily. He had to maintain Ma'at, which meant just governance, provision for the people, military defense, and proper religious observance. A pharaoh who failed these duties risked both earthly rebellion and cosmic disorder. The priests, servants of the gods. Egyptian temples weren't churches where congregations gathered for worship. They were the literal houses of the gods, where divine statues resided and where priests served the gods' daily needs. Priests weren't spiritual leaders in the modern sense, but temple functionaries. Their primary role was performing rituals that sustained the gods and, by extension, cosmic order. The daily temple ritual involved awakening the god statue, washing it, clothing it, offering food, and reciting prayers, treating the divine image as one would treat a living person of highest status. Priesthood wasn't necessarily a lifetime vocation. Many priests served in rotating shifts, spending 1 month in 4 at the temple and the rest of the time in secular occupations. This system, documented in temple records, meant that priestly knowledge and status were relatively widespread among the educated elite. Certain priestly positions were hereditary, particularly the highest ranks. The high priest of Ptah at Memphis, for instance, often came from the same families generation after generation. These hereditary priests accumulated enormous wealth and political influence. Priests underwent purification rituals before serving in the temple, shaving all body hair, bathing in sacred lakes, wearing only pure linen, no wool or leather, and abstaining from certain foods and sexual activity during their service period. These practices separated them from ordinary life, making them ritually pure enough to approach the gods. Different types of priests had specialized roles. The Hemnetger, servant of the god, performed daily rituals. The lector priest, Hariheb, recited the sacred texts. The Sem priest, wearing a leopard skin, performed funerary rites. The hour priests observed the stars and determined festival times. Female musicians and singers performed in temples, particularly in the cults of Hathor and other goddesses. Dr. Serge Soneron's classic study of Egyptian priesthood reveals a complex hierarchy and bureaucracy. Large temples like Karnak employed hundreds of personnel, from high priests to maintenance workers. Temple records document their salaries, work schedules, and disputes, showing that temples were major economic and social institutions, not just religious ones. The temple library, called the House of Life, served as a center of learning where priests studied sacred texts, medicine, astronomy, and magic. These institutions preserved and transmitted Egyptian knowledge across generations, making priests not just ritualists, but scholars and intellectuals. The ultimate principle. We've mentioned Ma'at repeatedly, but her centrality to Egyptian thought deserves deeper exploration. Ma'at was simultaneously a goddess, a principle, and a practice embodying truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order in all their dimensions. Philosophically, Ma'at represented the Egyptian answer to the problem of existence. Why does the universe exist rather than chaos? Because Ma'at prevails. Why should humans behave ethically? To align with Ma'at, what happens after death? Judgment based on adherence to Ma'at. Ma'at wasn't arbitrary divine command, but the inherent structure of reality. The gods themselves were subject to Ma'at, bound by its principles. Even the creator god operated according to Ma'at, not capriciously or arbitrarily. This concept gave Egyptian ethics an objective foundation. Right and wrong weren't matters of opinion or social convention, but cosmic fact. To lie, to steal, to murder was to violate the fundamental structure of existence, to introduce chaos into order. The social dimensions of Ma'at were equally important. Justice in the law courts was called Ma'at, fair weights and measures embodied Ma'at, honest speech was Ma'at, proper hierarchy and social order reflected Ma'at. The concept pervaded every aspect of life. Wisdom literature constantly invokes Ma'at as the guide to proper living. The instruction of Ptahhotep, dating to the Old Kingdom, advises, "Follow your heart as long as you live. Do not do more than is told you. Do not lessen the time of following the heart. It is abhorrent to the Ka to waste his time. Do not lose the daily opportunity to increase your household, and do Ma'at, then you will endure on earth." The political use of Ma'at is evident in royal inscriptions. Pharaohs claim to have established Ma'at in the place of Isfet, meaning they restored order from chaos. This legitimized their rule, while also setting a standard by which their governance could be judged. Dr. Jan Osman has argued that Ma'at represents one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated attempts to ground ethics in cosmic order rather than simple divine command or social consensus. It's a form of natural law theory. Morality derives from the nature of reality itself. The opposite of Ma'at was Isfet chaos, disorder, lies, injustice, violence, destruction. Isfet wasn't simply evil, but the primordial chaos that existed before creation and constantly threatened to return. Every violation of Ma'at was a victory for Isfet, a step toward cosmic dissolution. This cosmic battle between Ma'at and Isfet explained the presence of evil and suffering in the world. They weren't divine punishment or arbitrary fate, but the ongoing struggle inherent in existence. Humans participated in this struggle through their choices, supporting Ma'at through ethical living or supporting Isfet through wrongdoing. The daily cosmic drama. Egyptian religion understood existence as an ongoing drama playing out on cosmic, national, and personal scales simultaneously. The daily journey of the sun god Ra through the sky and underworld was the primary cosmic drama. Each dawn represented Ra's victory over Apophis, the serpent of chaos who attempted each night to swallow the sun and prevent dawn. This wasn't ancient history, but a battle occurring every single night, eternally. The sun rose each morning because Ra, aided by other gods and the blessed dead, defeated chaos once again. Temple rituals paralleled and supported this cosmic drama. The daily temple ritual of awakening, feeding, and honoring the gods sustained them for their eternal battle against Isfet. Human worship literally empowered the gods to maintain order. This created a reciprocal relationship between gods and humans. The gods created and sustained the world, but humans sustained the gods through worship and offerings. Neither could exist without the other. Egyptian texts explicitly state this mutual dependence. The gods need humans, as humans need the gods. Dr. Emily Teeter observes that this reciprocity made Egyptian religion fundamentally optimistic. Humans weren't helpless before divine power, but active participants in maintaining cosmic order. Through ethical living, proper ritual, and offerings, humans contributed to the universe's continued existence. The annual festivals dramatized myths and cosmic events for the public. The Opet festival at Thebes celebrated Amun-Ra's journey from Karnak to Luxor Temple, renewing the king's divine power. The Festival of the Valley allowed the living to feast with the dead at ancestral tombs. The mysteries of Osiris at Abydos reenacted his death and resurrection. These festivals weren't mere entertainment, but ritual reenactments that made mythic events present and powerful. By participating, the community renewed cosmic order and their connection to the gods. The question of monotheism, the Aten heresy. For a brief period during the 18th dynasty, Egyptian religion underwent a radical transformation that raised questions about the nature of polytheism and the possibility of monotheism in ancient Egypt. Amenhotep IV, who ruled c. 1353 to 1336 BCE, changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and promoted the worship of the Aten, the sun disk, as the sole god. He closed the temples of other gods, erased their names from monuments, moved the capital to a new city called Akhetaten, modern Amarna, and developed a new artistic and religious style. The great hymn to the Aten, possibly composed by Akhenaten himself, is one of ancient Egypt's most beautiful religious texts. It praises the Aten as the sole creator of all life, the universal God who sustains all creation through his light. Beautiful you rise upon the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, creator of life. When you set in the western horizon, the land is in darkness, in the manner of death. Every lion comes forth from its den, all creeping things, they bite. Darkness is a shroud, and the earth is in stillness, for he who made them rests in his horizon. At daybreak, when you arise on the horizon, you shine as the Aten by day. You dispel the darkness and give your rays. Was this genuine monotheism? Scholars debate. Akhenaten never denied his own divinity or that of the royal family. The Aten wasn't a transcendent god beyond nature, but the visible sun disk itself. Other supernatural beings like the dead and demons weren't explicitly rejected. Dr. Eric Hornung argues it was monolatry, worship of one god without denying others' existence, rather than true monotheism. Dr. Jan Assmann sees it as a revolutionary break with traditional Egyptian theology, introducing concepts of exclusivity and universalism unprecedented in Egyptian thought. What's clear is that the reform was deeply unpopular. After Akhenaten's death, his successors Tutankhamun most famously restored the old gods, abandoned Akhetaten, and erased Akhenaten's name from monuments. His memory was execrated as the heretic king who had violated Ma'at by abandoning the traditional gods. The Aten heresy's failure demonstrates how deeply polytheism was embedded in Egyptian culture. The multiplicity of gods wasn't a primitive confusion to be corrected, but a sophisticated understanding of divine reality's complexity. Reducing this to a single god felt like impoverishment, not enlightenment. Yet the experiment left traces. The hymn to the Aten's language and ideas influenced later religious thought. Some scholars see parallels with Psalm 104 inches, the Hebrew Bible. The concept of a universal God who created and sustained all peoples, not just Egyptians, was revolutionary and would reappear in later religious developments. The decline and persistence of Egyptian religion. Egyptian religion survived for over 3 millennia, from at least 3100 BCE to the closing of the last temples in the 6th century CE, an extraordinary longevity that testifies to its depth and adaptability. Foreign conquests brought new influences. The Persians, who conquered Egypt in 525 BCE, respected Egyptian religion and even participated in it. Alexander the Great, 332 BCE, was crowned pharaoh and worshipped as the son of Amun. The Ptolemaic dynasty, 305 to 30 BCE, Greek rulers descended from Alexander's general, enthusiastically embraced Egyptian religion, building massive temples and promoting the old gods. The Ptolemies also created syncretic deities like Serapis, combining Egyptian and Greek elements to appeal to both populations. The cult of Isis spread throughout the Mediterranean, becoming one of the Roman Empire's most popular religions. Roman rule, 30 BCE, 395 CE, initially continued this pattern. Early emperors were depicted as pharaohs on temple walls, and traditional religion continued to function. But Christianity's rise changed everything. Christianity, with its exclusivist monotheism and rejection of pagan gods, couldn't be syncretically absorbed like earlier foreign influences. Christian emperors began closing temples, banning sacrifices, and suppressing the old religion. The last hieroglyphic inscription dates to 394 CE at Philae Temple. The last demotic inscription, 394 CE, and the last hieroglyphic text, 452 CE, marked the end of ancient Egyptian writing. When Emperor Justinian ordered Philae Temple closed in the 552nd CE, organized Egyptian religion effectively ended after over 3,500 years. Yet elements persisted. Coptic Christianity absorbed aspects of Egyptian religion. The Ankh symbol became a Christian cross variant. The Madonna and child icon may have been influenced by Isis nursing Horus. Monastic practices may have roots in ancient Egyptian priestly life. Islamic Egypt, from the 7th century onward, preserved some folk traditions with ancient roots, though divorced from their original theological context. The Moulids festival celebrations of saints echo ancient Egyptian festivals. Certain protective amulets and magical practices show continuities with pharaonic magic. The memory of ancient Egypt never entirely vanished. Arab historians preserved knowledge of pyramids and temples. European travelers wrote accounts. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 and its decipherment by Jean-François Champollion in 1822 opened Egyptian texts to modern understanding, bringing the ancient religion back to life in a new way as history and scholarship rather than living faith. And all. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Egyptian Religion. What can ancient Egyptian beliefs teach us about death, life, and meaning? As the last temple lamps were extinguished and the final priest spoke the final prayer, a religious tradition that had endured longer than any other in human history came to an end. But was it truly an ending? Or did Egyptian religion, like the dead it promised to resurrect, transform into new forms that continue to influence human thought about mortality, meaning, and the sacred? To answer this question, we must look at the concrete historical evidence of Egyptian religion's influence on later traditions, examine what modern archaeology and scholarship have revealed about how this complex system actually functioned, and consider what insights Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife might offer to contemporary people seeking meaning in mortality. The historical influence on later religions. The question of how Egyptian religion influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam has generated extensive scholarship and, inevitably, controversy. Direct connections are difficult to prove definitively, but certain parallels and possible influences are worth examining. The Hebrew Bible's contacts with Egypt are extensive and well documented. The Exodus narrative places the Israelites in Egypt for centuries. Joseph rises to high position in Pharaoh's court. Moses is raised in the Egyptian court and learns all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Acts 7:22. Archaeological evidence confirms regular interaction between Egypt and the Levant throughout the Bronze and Iron Ages. Certain biblical passages show possible Egyptian influence. Psalm 104's hymn to God's creation parallels Akhenaten's hymn to the Aten in structure, imagery, and specific phrases. The wisdom literature, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, shares themes and sometimes specific sayings with Egyptian wisdom texts, like the instruction of Amenemope. Professor James Hoffmeyer has documented numerous Egyptian loanwords in biblical Hebrew, particularly in contexts related to administration, construction, and religion. This linguistic evidence confirms deep cultural contact, though it doesn't prove religious influence. The concept of judgment after death, weighing souls against a standard of righteousness, divine assessment of moral worth, these Egyptian ideas appear in later Jewish and Christian eschatology. The apocalyptic literature of Second Temple Judaism describes judgment scenes with angels, divine books recording deeds, and eternal rewards or punishments, all concepts present in Egyptian religion. Early Christianity developed in a world where Egyptian religion remained active and influential. The cult of Isis was enormously popular in the Roman Empire, offering personal salvation, resurrection, symbolism, and elaborate initiation rituals. Some scholars suggest the mysteries of Christianity, baptism, Eucharist, the promise of resurrection, developed partially in response to competition from Egyptian and other mystery religions. The iconography of Isis nursing Horus influenced Christian depictions of Mary and Jesus, according to art historians. The early monks who founded Christian monasticism in the Egyptian desert may have been influenced by Egyptian priestly practices of celibacy, asceticism, and ritual purity. Islam's relationship with Egyptian religion is more distant, as Islam arose after Egyptian religion had effectively ceased. However, Islamic eschatology includes the weighing of deeds on divine scales at judgment, the crossing of a narrow bridge over hell, and detailed descriptions of paradise and punishment concepts with parallels in Egyptian afterlife beliefs. Dr. Jan Assmann has argued that Egyptian religion introduced the concept of normative religion, the idea that proper belief and practice matter for salvation, that adherence to divine commands determines eternal fate. This contrasts with earlier religion focused mainly on maintaining cosmic cycles through ritual. Whether through direct influence or independent development of similar ideas, the parallels are striking and suggest that Egyptian religion asked and attempted to answer fundamental questions about life, death, and morality that continue to concern humanity. What modern science reveals about Egyptian beliefs, contemporary archaeological and scientific methods have transformed our understanding of Egyptian religion, revealing both the sophistication of their practices and the genuine conviction behind them. CT scanning and chemical analysis of mummies show that embalming was sophisticated medical practice. The embalmers had detailed anatomical knowledge, understood chemical preservation, and achieved results that modern science struggles to duplicate in terms of long-term preservation. Dr. Bob Breyer's experimental mummification in 1994, using ancient techniques, demonstrated that the process required expertise, precision, and specialized knowledge. This wasn't simple ritual but applied science, though understood in religious rather than secular terms. Genetic analysis of mummies has revealed family relationships, confirming some ancient records and correcting others. The royal mummies show that pharaohs did practice sibling marriage as texts claimed. DNA from Tutankhamun, his parents, and grandparents confirmed the complex family relationships that historical records suggested. Paleopathology, the study of ancient disease, shows what killed ancient Egyptians and what medical conditions they endured. Malaria, tuberculosis, parasitic infections, dental disease, arthritis, cancer, all are visible in mummified remains. This evidence provides context for understanding Egyptian medicine and their concerns about health in both life and the afterlife. Radiocarbon dating, dendrochronology, and astronomical analysis have refined Egyptian chronology, allowing precise dating of religious texts and practices. We can now trace the evolution of beliefs with greater accuracy, seeing how theological concepts developed over time. Linguistic analysis of hieroglyphic and hieratic texts using computational methods and databases has revealed patterns in religious language and thought. The vocabulary of the sacred, the metaphors Egyptians used for divine reality, the evolution of theological terminology all become clearer through systematic linguistic study. Archaeological surveys using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and other remote sensing technologies continue to discover new temples, tombs, and settlements. Each discovery adds to our understanding of how religion functioned at different social levels and in different regions. Dr. Salima Ikram's research on animal mummies using CT scans and chemical analysis has revealed that the animal mummy industry was enormous. Millions of ibises, cats, dogs, crocodiles, and other creatures were mummified as votive offerings. This wasn't casual piety, but massive religious economy, showing how deeply belief in the gods and the afterlife permeated society. Excavations at worker villages like Deir el-Medina provide unparalleled insight into ordinary people's religious lives. The ostraka pottery shards and limestone flakes used as writing material from this site include prayers, hymns, letters to the dead, magical spells, and daily records. They show that religion wasn't just elite theology, but daily practice touching every aspect of life. Dr. Andrea McDowell's study of Deir el-Medina reveals a community deeply engaged with religion at personal, family, and community levels. Workers made offerings at local shrines, consulted oracles about daily decisions, celebrated religious festivals, and prepared elaborately for the afterlife despite their relatively modest means. The oracle phenomenon and personal piety. One discovery that has transformed understanding of Egyptian religion is the prevalence of oracles' consultation of gods through their cult statues for guidance on personal and community matters. Documents from Deir el-Medina show workers consulting the oracle of the deified king Amenhotep I about matters like theft, marital disputes, whether to undertake a journey, or where to build a tomb. The god, through his priests manipulating his cult statue, would indicate yes or no answers. This practice reveals that Egyptian religion wasn't just formal state cult, but personal relationship with the divine. People believed the gods cared about and could help with everyday problems. The gods weren't distant cosmic forces, but accessible helpers who could be approached for practical assistance. The personal piety movement of the New Kingdom emphasized direct relationship with the gods, individual prayer and devotion, and moral transformation through religious experience. Hymns and prayers from this period express deep emotion, personal relationship, and gratitude for divine mercy. One remarkable text, the prayers of Pa-Hedoumen, shows a man who committed some sin, suffered divine punishment, possibly disease, repented, and was healed. He erected a stela praising the gods' justice and mercy. He is merciful when one calls to him. I will not again do that which he abhors. His Ka is in peace with me, and he is merciful to me. This sounds remarkably like later religious conversion narratives: sin, punishment, repentance, forgiveness, transformation. It shows that Egyptian religion could be deeply personal and emotionally engaging, not just ritualistic observance. Dr. John Baines has argued that the New Kingdom saw a democratization not just of afterlife access, but of personal relationship with the gods. What began as royal privilege became available to everyone: direct contact with the divine, personal prayer, individual moral transformation, philosophical and ethical insights. Beyond historical influence and archaeological evidence, Egyptian religion offers philosophical and ethical insights that remain relevant. The Egyptian understanding of death as transformation rather than ending provides an alternative to both materialist denial of any afterlife and simplistic notions of immortality as disembodied existence. Egyptians insisted that both body and spirit mattered, that physical reality wasn't something to escape but to perfect and eternalize. This embodied view of the afterlife influenced their ethics. Because you would need your body, you should care for it. Because you would face judgment for your deeds, you should live justly. Because eternity was social, reuniting with family, dwelling among the gods, you should build good relationships. The concept of Ma'at as cosmic order that transcends individual whim offers a foundation for objective ethics. Right and wrong aren't arbitrary or culturally relative, but grounded in the fundamental structure of reality. This resonates with natural law, philosophy, and virtue ethics in Western thought. The Egyptian emphasis on names and memory as essential to existence raises profound questions about personal identity. Are we merely physical bodies, or do our names, our memories, our impact on others constitute essential aspects of our being? The Egyptian belief that to be forgotten is to die a second death suggests that legacy and memory matter deeply to human meaning. The acceptance of multiple perspectives on truth aspectival thinking offers an alternative to rigid dogmatism without collapsing into relativism. Truth is objective, mat exist, but complex realities require multiple perspectives to adequately understand. This epistemological humility seems increasingly relevant in a pluralistic world. The reciprocal relationship between gods and humans neither can exist without the other suggests that the sacred and the secular, the divine and the human, are interdependent rather than separate. Religious meaning isn't imposed from outside, but emerges from the relationship between human and divine. Dr. Jan Assmann's concept of cultural memory uses Egyptian religion as a case study for understanding how civilizations construct identity through shared myths, rituals, and sacred narratives. The extraordinary continuity of Egyptian civilization for over 3 millennia demonstrates the power of religious culture to maintain social cohesion and meaning across vast spans of time. What the Egyptians got right. From a modern perspective, much of Egyptian religion seems obviously false. The sun isn't a god traveling in a boat. The dead don't literally journey through an underworld geography. Hearts aren't weighed against feathers by jackal-headed deities. But perhaps the Egyptians were asking the right questions, even if their specific answers don't satisfy modern sensibilities. They asked, what gives life meaning? Their answer, connection to cosmic order, mat, ethical living, community, and hope for continuity beyond death. They asked, how should we understand death? Their answer, as transformation rather than annihilation, as a journey requiring preparation, as a test of moral worth, as potentially leading to renewal and joy. They asked, what makes humans valuable? Their answer, we participate in maintaining cosmic order. We have souls with eternal potential. We can become true of voice and join the gods themselves. They asked, how should we live? Their answer, truthfully, justly, generously, with reverence for the sacred, with care for our bodies and spirits, with awareness that our actions have cosmic significance. They asked, what is the relationship between individual and community? Their answer, we are interconnected in life and death. Our actions affect cosmic order. We have obligations to both the living and the dead, and we will be reunited with loved ones in the afterlife. Modern secular humanism, various religious traditions, and philosophical systems offer different answers to these questions, but the questions themselves remain urgent and relevant. The Egyptians took them seriously enough to build civilizations around their answers, to invest enormous resources in pursuing them, and to develop sophisticated philosophical and theological systems to explore them. The psychological dimension. Contemporary psychology and anthropology offer insights into why Egyptian religion took the forms it did and why similar beliefs appear across cultures. Terror management theory, developed by social psychologists, suggests that awareness of mortality creates existential anxiety that humans manage through cultural worldviews, promising either literal immortality or symbolic immortality through legacy and meaning. Egyptian religion provided both literal afterlife for the individual and cultural immortality through the civilization's continuity. The elaborate preparation for death mummification, tomb construction, funerary texts gave people agency in facing mortality. Rather than passive acceptance of death, Egyptians actively prepared for it, transforming existential dread into purposeful activity. Dr. Ernest Becker's The Denial of Death argues that much human culture is organized around denying or transcending mortality. Egyptian religion is perhaps the most elaborate and honest system for confronting death directly while refusing to accept it as final. They didn't deny death, but insisted it wasn't the end, a nuanced position between denial and despair. The belief in judgment after death served psychological and social functions. It provided cosmic justice when earthly justice failed, assured that evil would be punished and good rewarded even if not in this life. This belief could provide comfort to the oppressed and restraint for the powerful. The multiplicity of gods allowed Egyptians to relate to different aspects of sacred reality through different deities. A mother worried about childbirth could appeal to Tawret. A scribe seeking wisdom could invoke Thoth. A traveler needing protection could pray to Bez. This psychological flexibility made religion relevant to diverse needs and situations. The emphasis on ritual and knowledge, knowing the right spells, names, and procedures gave a sense of control. The afterlife was dangerous but navigable with proper preparation. This contrasts with religious systems where salvation depends entirely on divine grace or arbitrary fate, offering less personal agency. Contemporary revivals and influences. Egyptian religion hasn't entirely disappeared. Modern movements have attempted to revive it, and its influence persists in various ways. Kemeticism, a modern revival of ancient Egyptian religion, has small but dedicated communities worldwide. These practitioners study ancient texts, perform adapted rituals, and worship the Egyptian gods. While they recognize they're reconstructing rather than continuing an unbroken tradition, they find meaning in the ancient wisdom. The Rosicrucian movement, Freemasonry, and various occult traditions incorporate Egyptian symbolism and concepts. The Eye of Horus, Ankh symbols, pyramid imagery, these appear throughout Western esoteric traditions, though often divorced from their original religious context. New Age spirituality frequently incorporates Egyptian elements, talk of pyramids' mysterious energies, past lives in ancient Egypt, crystal healing allegedly based on ancient Egyptian knowledge. These modern interpretations bear little resemblance to actual ancient Egyptian religion, but demonstrate its continued fascination. Academic Egyptology, while approaching the subject historically rather than religiously, has produced deep understanding and appreciation for Egyptian religious thought. Scholars like Eric Hornung, Jan Osman, and Emily Teeter have revealed the sophistication and depth of Egyptian theology, showing it deserves serious philosophical and theological engagement, not dismissal as primitive superstition. Museums worldwide house Egyptian collections, bringing ancient religious art and artifacts to millions of viewers. The British Museum's Egyptian galleries, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all provide access to the physical evidence of this ancient faith. Popular culture continues to be fascinated by Egyptian religion. Movies, novels, video games, and television shows regularly feature Egyptian gods, mummies, curses, and afterlife journeys. While often inaccurate, this popular interest keeps Egyptian civilization in public consciousness and sometimes inspires deeper learning. What we can learn. As we stand at the conclusion of this journey through Egyptian religion, what practical wisdom can we extract from these ancient beliefs? First, the Egyptian embrace of death as part of life, as something to prepare for rather than deny, offers a healthier psychological stance than modern death avoidance. Facing mortality honestly, planning for it, and finding meaning in our finite existence, these are valuable practices, whether or not we believe in a literal afterlife. Second, the emphasis on ethical living not as divine command alone, but as cosmic necessity, suggests that morality has objective grounding. We might not accept Ma'at as literal cosmic principle, but the insight that justice, truth, and compassion align with the fundamental structure of a meaningful universe remains powerful. Third, the Egyptian understanding of humans as complex beings, body, soul, spirit, name, shadow, offers richer anthropology than simple body-soul dualism. We are physical, psychological, social, spiritual creatures, and all these dimensions deserve attention and cultivation. Fourth, the reciprocal relationship between individual and community, living and dead, human and divine, reminds us that we exist in webs of relationship and obligation. Radical individualism is as incomplete as collectivism that erases the person. We are both individual and communal. Fifth, the Egyptian conviction that knowledge matters, that learning the right names, understanding the cosmic geography, preparing adequately suggests that education, wisdom, and preparation are crucial for navigating life successfully. Ignorance is dangerous, knowledge is empowering. Sixth, the acceptance of mystery and multiple perspectives prevents dogmatic certainty while maintaining confidence in truth's existence. We can hold firm convictions while acknowledging that reality is more complex than any single perspective can capture. Seventh, The integration of religion with daily life oracles consulted about daily decisions, gods invoked for practical help, festivals celebrating both cosmic and seasonal events suggest that the sacred and secular needn't be rigidly separated. Finding meaning in everyday activities, seeing cosmic significance in mundane tasks, celebrating life's rhythms, these create richer existence. Eighth, the Egyptian investment in beauty, tomb paintings, exquisite amulets, fine literature, architectural marvels demonstrates that aesthetics matters religiously and existentially. Beauty isn't frivolous luxury but essential to meaningful human life. The final journey's end. As the sun sets over the Nile one more time, as it has for millions of evenings before and will for millions after, we complete our journey through Egyptian religion. We've walked from the birth of the gods through the geography of death, stood before the scales of judgment, and explored the cosmic order that sustained this civilization for over 3,000 years. The Egyptians are gone. Their language is dead. Their temples are ruins. Their gods are no longer worshipped. Yet their legacy persists in the monuments that still astound visitors, in the texts that reveal sophisticated theology, in the mummies that demonstrate elaborate care for the dead, in the influence on later religions, and in the perennial questions they asked about death, meaning, and eternity. They believed that death was not the end, that the justified would live forever, that names and memories were as real and important as physical bodies, that cosmic order was worth maintaining at any cost, and that humans could literally become divine through knowledge, ethics, and ritual. Were they right? The modern world has largely rejected their literal claims. We don't mummify our dead expecting physical resurrection. We don't expect to have our hearts weighed against feathers. We don't believe in a geography of underworld caverns and rivers of fire. But perhaps they were right in deeper ways. Perhaps death is transformation rather than simple ending. Perhaps ethical living does align with cosmic order, whatever we understand that to mean. Perhaps humans do have capacity for transcendence, for becoming more than merely biological organisms. Perhaps memory and legacy do constitute a kind of immortality. Perhaps beauty, knowledge, and relationships do matter eternally. The ancient Egyptians spent 3,000 years building elaborate answers to humanity's deepest questions. They poured their genius, their wealth, their artistry, and their faith into confronting mortality and asserting meaning. Their civilization fell, but their questions remain. What happens when we die? How should we live? What makes existence meaningful? What is our relationship to the cosmic order? How do we maintain justice, truth, and harmony in the face of chaos? These questions continue to haunt and inspire humanity. Every generation must answer them anew, constructing worldviews that make sense of death and life, meaning and oblivion, hope and despair. The ancient Egyptians offer us their answers, preserved in stone and papyrus, gold and paint, text and image. We may not accept their conclusions, but we can admire their effort, learn from their wisdom, and be inspired by their refusal to accept death as the final word. As we leave the Hall of Two Truths, as we exit the tombs and temples, as we return from the fields of Aru to our own modern world, we carry with us the memory of a civilization that looked mortality in the face and declared, "Death is not the end. The journey continues. We shall live forever." Whether that declaration was literally true matters less than the courage it took to make it, the hope it inspired, and the meaning it provided to millions of human beings across thousands of years. In that sense, perhaps the ancient Egyptians did achieve immortality after all, not in some literal afterlife, but in the enduring legacy of their ideas, their art, their wisdom, and their eternal questions. The sun will rise again tomorrow over the Nile, as it always has and always will. The pyramids will still stand, the tombs will still hold their secrets, and the story of Egyptian gods, religion, and afterlife will continue to fascinate, inspire, and challenge all who encounter it. For as long as we remember them, as long as we study their texts, admire their art, and grapple with their questions, the ancient Egyptians live on. They have become what they always hoped to become, Maheru, true of voice, speaking to us across the millennia, sharing their hard-won wisdom about life, death, and the hope of eternity. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all, that those who live according to truth, who create beauty, who ask important questions and seek meaningful answers, do achieve a kind of immortality. Not in supernatural heavens, but in the ongoing human conversation about what it means to be alive, to be mortal, and to hope for something more. The ancient Egyptians speak to us still, and we would be wise to listen. Jax and Jax, Epilogue, the eternal return. In the Cairo Museum, a papyrus lies under glass, its hieroglyphs still bright after 3,200 years. It is the papyrus of Ani, one of the finest surviving copies of the Book of the Dead. Tourists pass by, cameras clicking, guides explaining in a dozen languages what this ancient scribe hoped to achieve. Ani wanted what all Egyptians wanted, to pass through death's darkness into eternal light, to stand justified before the gods, to dwell in the fields of Aru, to live forever. He paid scribes to prepare this elaborate guide, artists to illustrate it with scenes of gods and judgment and paradise. He placed his hope in knowledge, ethics, and ritual. Did he succeed? His mummy is lost, his tomb probably robbed in antiquity, his name forgotten by all but scholars. By Egyptian standards, this would seem like failure, the second death, oblivion. But here lies his papyrus, preserved and protected, studied and admired. Here is his name, still readable, still spoken. Here is his image, still visible, showing him worshiping the gods. Here is his voice, still true, still teaching us about hope and fear and the human confrontation with mortality. Perhaps Ani achieved exactly what he sought, not in some literal supernatural afterlife, but in the immortality of memory, the persistence of his work, the continuation of his voice across the vast gulf of time. And perhaps this is true for all of us. We will not literally journey through 12 hours of night or have our hearts weighed by Anubis, but we too face death's mystery. We too must decide how to live in the face of mortality. We too must choose whether to rage against the dying of the light or go gentle into that good night, or, like the Egyptians, to insist that night is not eternal, that dawn follows darkness, that death is transformation rather than ending. The specific forms change. The beliefs evolve. The gods come and go. But the fundamental human questions persist, and each generation must answer them in their own way, constructing meaning from the raw materials of existence and mortality. The ancient Egyptians constructed monuments of stone to house their dead, monuments of words to guide them, monuments of thought to explain the mysteries. These monuments remain, testifying to their builders' faith that something of humanity could transcend death's boundary. They were right, though not in the way they imagined. What transcends is not the individual consciousness, but the human project, the ongoing quest for meaning, the construction of culture and civilization, the creation of beauty and wisdom, the asking of eternal questions, and the proposing of provisional answers. We are their heirs, whether we know it or not. When we face death honestly rather than denying it, when we seek ethical lives grounded in something beyond mere preference, when we hope that our lives matter beyond our brief years, when we create beauty and pursue wisdom, we walk paths the Egyptians first mapped. Their gods are silent now. Their temples are tourist attractions. Their elaborate afterlife geography exists only in ancient texts. But their fundamental insight remains valid, that human beings are more than mere matter, that life has meaning, that death does not have the final word. How we cash out that insight, whether in religious faith, philosophical conviction, or secular humanism, varies. But the insight itself, the refusal to accept meaninglessness and oblivion, the insistence that human existence matters cosmically and eternally, this is the Egyptians' enduring gift. As visitors file past Ani's papyrus, as scholars continue to decipher ancient texts, as pyramids stand against the desert sky, as the Nile continues its eternal flow the ancient Egyptians live on, not in the literal fields of Aru, but in the persistent human hope for transcendence, meaning, and life beyond death. They achieve what they sought. Their names are remembered, their voices still speak, their wisdom still teaches, their beauty still inspires. In the only immortality that may be real, they have succeeded. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate lesson of Egyptian religion. Immortality is not individual escape from death, but contribution to the eternal human project of meaning-making, truth-seeking, beauty-creating, and hope-sustaining. The sun sets on another day, as it has for billions of days before. Tomorrow it will rise again, as the Egyptians always knew it would, as it always has, as it always will, until the cosmos itself ends. If it ends at all, Ma'at persists. The cosmic order continues. The journey goes on. And we, like the ancient Egyptians before us, travel through life toward death, carrying our questions, constructing our meanings, hoping against hope that we are more than dust, that our lives matter, that something of us will endure. In this sense, we are all ancient Egyptians, all seekers of the eternal, all hoping to hear, at the end of our journey, the words every Egyptian longed to hear. Your heart is found true, your name shall live forever. Come forth in today. May it be so for all who seek truth, practice justice, create beauty, and face death with courage and hope. The story ends, the journey continues, the questions persist, and that, ultimately, is exactly as it should be.